Welcome to Harry's Verse. Today's adventure, what if Harry Potter was Wolverine's reincarnation and no curse could ever kill him? If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now let's begin. Chapter 1, The Healing Wakes. The cupboard under the stairs was 4 feet long, and Harry Potter had learned to sleep in it the way a soldier sleeps in a trench, though he had no word yet for what he was. He was 10 years old the night it started, and he did not know it had started because the body keeps its own counsel. Vernon Dursley had come home smelling of warm beer and a bad day at the office, and a bad day at the office in that house had a way of finding the smallest person in it. The complaint was nothing. A burnt pan, a word said wrong. Vernon's hand was the size of a dinner plate, and it caught Harry across the side of the head and put him into the wall, and the wall did not give, and something behind Harry's eye did. He went down. He stayed down because down was safer. He listened to Vernon breathe himself back to ordinary, listened to the television rise again in the front room, and he lay on the kitchen lino with the cold coming up through his cheek and counted, the way he always counted, the long flat numbers that took him out of his own skin and put him somewhere a boy could survive. By the count of 200 the pain behind his eye had gone strange. Not gone, strange. It had stopped being a hot spreading bruise and become a busy thing, an itch under the bone, a sensation like ants moving in formation. He had been hit enough times to know how a body healed, and a body did not heal like this. A body took its days. A body went green, then yellow, then sallow, and ached the whole while. This was hours. This was less than hours. He put 2 fingers to his cheekbone in the dark of the cupboard later and found nothing there to find. No swelling, no split. The skin was whole and the bone underneath was whole, and there was only the faintest warmth, the way a stove is warm an hour after it's off. He told himself he had imagined the wall. Children are good at telling themselves things. He was better than most because he had more practice. He was wrong, but it would be a year before the world made him admit it. The letters came when he was 11, and they came the way weather comes, with a low pressure first and then the storm. One letter addressed to the cupboard under the stairs in green ink that knew exactly where he slept. Then 10. Then 100 down the chimney in a white blizzard while Vernon swung a fireplace poker at the air and screamed, and Harry stood in the middle of the storm of paper with his arms loose at his sides and felt, for the first time in his life, something in him lift its head. It was not joy. He would think about that later, that it had not been joy. It had been recognition. Some old animal at the back of him had smelled change on the wind and come awake to see what it was, and it had not been afraid, and Harry was a boy who had been afraid every day he could remember, and the absence of it frightened him more than the fear ever had. The giant who broke down the door on the storm-racked island called him Harry and called himself Hagrid and called the world by names Harry had never heard but somehow did not need explained. Wizard, magic, Hogwarts. The words went into him and found grooves already cut for them. "You're a wizard, Harry," Hagrid said, as if it were the kindest thing one creature could tell another, and it was, and Harry believed him. But it was the other thing Hagrid said that stayed. Yes, survived, that's the long and short of it. He went Turkilya, the worst wizard there ever was, and the curse that's never failed, not once, not in all the years anyone can name it, hit ya, and ye're sittin' here, a baby. Not a scratch on ya, but that. A thick finger toward the scar on Harry's forehead, the lightning bolt that the Dursleys had told him came from the car crash that killed his good-for-nothing parents. Killin' curse, no one lives, no one's ever lived. Except you. Harry touched the scar, no one's ever lived except you. He had been told a great many lies in his life, and he had a sense for them now, a low instrument that hummed when an adult was managing him. It did not hum at Hagrid. The giant believed every word. And down in the dark at the back of Harry, the thing that had lifted its head turned the sentence over and over like a man turning a coin he doesn't recognize, testing the weight, looking for the trick. No one lives except you. It did not feel like a miracle to that thing. It felt like a memory it almost had. Diagon Alley unrolled in front of him, and Harry walked it the way he walked everywhere, which was to say he walked it like a man crossing open ground. He did not decide to do this. His eyes went to the exits without his asking. He clocked the alley's choke points, the dark mouth of Nocturne where the light changed, the wizards whose hands stayed near their pockets and the wizards whose didn't. He was 11 and he had never been trained to do any of it, and he did all of it before they reached the bank. The goblins he liked. He could not have said why except that they did not pretend. There was a hardness in them that did not lie about itself, and Harry had spent his whole life among soft people who lied, and the honesty of a hard thing was a relief to him like cold water. It was Ollivanders that broke the seal. The shop was narrow and dim and smelled of dust and old varnish, and under that very faintly of something Harry's nose caught and his mind couldn't place, a metallic note like a coin held too long, like blood that hadn't happened yet. The old man came out of the shadows between the shelves on feet that made no sound, and his pale eyes went to the scar first, the way everyone's did, and then they went to Harry's hands and stayed there a beat too long. Curious, Ollivander murmured, and Harry's low instrument hummed, but not at a lie, at interest. The man was looking at his hands the way a butcher looks at a joint, wand after wand. Holly, ash, ebony, a procession of slim dead things pressed into his fingers and snatched back before he could close his grip. The old man grew not frustrated but delighted, the way some men are delighted by a lock that won't give. "Tricky," he said, "oh very tricky." And then he came back from the deepest shelf with a long thin box, and his face had changed, and he opened it the way you open a thing you're afraid of. Holly and Phoenix feather, 11 inches, I wonder. Harry's hand closed on it. It was not warmth that came out of the wand. The books would tell him later that it was supposed to be warmth, a gentle heat, a fountain of red and gold sparks, a marriage. What came out of the wand for Harry was a line of cold fire straight up the bones of his arm, into the shoulder, into the old animal at the back of his skull, and the animal stood all the way up. The sparks were white. White and silver, and they did not fountain. They slashed 3 quick lines in the air over the counter, parallel, close, like something had been raked across the dark, and they hung there a half-second longer than light should hang before they died. Ollivander did not gasp. He went very still, which was worse. Curious, he said again, very softly. Yes, curious indeed that you should be destined for this wand when its brother, why, its brother gave you that. The eyes on the scar. 13.5 inches, you. Its brother did great things, Mr. Potter. Terrible, yes, but great. Harry was not listening, quite. He was looking at the 3 white lines fading over the counter and at his own hand around the wand, the knuckles, the spaces between the knuckles, where for one impossible instant he had felt a pressure from the inside, an itch under the bone, ants moving in formation, 3 points wanting out. It passed. The wand went quiet. The old animal lay down but did not sleep. Thank you, Harry said, because he had been taught to say it, and his voice was steady, and inside it was not. He paid 7 galleons. He walked out into the light. He did not look back at the window where Ollivander stood watching him go with his pale eyes turning over a coin he half recognized. He spent the last weeks of summer in the smallest bedroom, which the Dursleys had surrendered with the silence of people who had glimpsed a power and decided to stop poking it. He read. He had always read in stolen hours, but now the reading had a hunger to it. The history of magic, the killing curse named and unnamed, footnoted and feared, Avada Kedavra, no countercurse, no block, no survivor, except the books all came around to the same locked door and stood there with their hats in their hands. Harry Potter, age 1, the only soul in recorded history to take the green light and live. Theories abounded, none convinced. The author of one fat volume admitted, with the honesty of a man defeated, that magical scholarship had no mechanism for what had happened in Godric's Hollow, and that the most rigorous conclusion was that no conclusion was possible. Harry read that and felt the animal at the back of him stir, and for a moment, just a moment, he saw something that wasn't the page. Snow, white ground under a white sky, and a cold so total it had a sound, a high thin ringing, trees black against the white. And a smell, the metal smell from Ollivander's, but stronger, much stronger, the smell of a great deal of blood freezing fast. He blinked and the bedroom came back, the streetlight orange through the thin curtains, the book heavy on his knees. His heart was going hard and even, not the panicked stutter of a frightened boy, the slow, heavy pound of a body that had decided to fight. He had never been to snow like that. He had never smelled blood freeze. He was 11 years old and he had grown up in a cupboard in Surrey, and he had a memory in him that did not belong to his life. He set the book down. He held his own hand up in the orange light and looked at it, the small knuckles, the bitten nails, and he said very quietly to the room and to the animal and to whatever was in him that the books had no mechanism for. What are you? Nothing answered, but something listened. He could feel it listen. The dream came the first night. He could not stop it. He was in a place that was all hard edges and white light, and he was strapped down, and there was water. He was in water and breathing it somehow, and there were men beyond the glass with clipboards and calm faces, the calm of men doing a job, and one of them said a number out loud, a temperature, and nodded, and the pain began. It began at the bones. It went into the bones. It was a cold that was also a fire, poured molten into the marrow of him, into every long bone and every small one, into the cage of his ribs and the architecture of his hands, and his body arched against the straps and his mouth opened and the water took his scream and gave him nothing back. He could feel the metal going into him. He could feel it bonding to the bone, becoming the bone, a second skeleton laid over the first like a sentence laid over a man, and he understood with total clarity that they were not trying to kill him. They were trying to make him into something that could not die, and it was working. A name went past in the dark of the dream, not James, not a name from any book Harry had read. A short, hard name, one syllable, the kind of name you could say while you were doing something that hurt. And under it fainter, an older name, a longer one, soft at the front and sharp at the end, and the feeling around that older name was so old and so full that Harry's sleeping mind could not hold it and broke. He woke. He woke without the gasp the films had taught him to expect. He woke the way a guard wakes, all at once, fully, his eyes open on the dark ceiling and his body already reading the room, the door, the window, the weight of the house around him, the breathing of 3 sleepers down the hall. No threat, he catalogued no threat, and only then let himself feel the bed under him and the sweat cold on his chest. His forearm itched. He brought it up into the slant of streetlight, the right forearm, the soft inside of it, and he watched 3 thin red lines close themselves while he looked. Nothing had cut him. The sheets were whole. His nails were bitten to nothing and could not have done it. But there they were, 3 parallel lines welling up dark, and then, as he watched, as his breath stopped in his chest, sealing the way the sparks had sealed the dark over Ollivander's counter, the edges drawing together and the red going to pink and the pink going to nothing, to clean unbroken skin in the time it took him to understand that he was watching it happen. 3 lines, close together, parallel. He turned his hand over and looked at his knuckles in the orange light, at the spaces between them where the wand had made him feel a pressure from the inside, and he thought, with a calm that did not belong to an 11-year-old and that he would spend years learning to fear and then learning to use, they come from inside. He did not know what they were. The animal at the back of him knew and would not yet say, the way an old soldier won't say the worst thing he's seen until he's good and ready, but Harry felt the shape of the knowing pressing up under the words, 3 points wanting out, an itch under the bone, ants moving in formation, and he understood that the dream had not been a dream. It had been a record. Somewhere in some life, in some white room under some white sky, that had been done to a man, and the man had lived, and the man was in him, and the man was waking up. He did the thing then that he would later understand was the first decision of his new life, though it looked like nothing, though no one saw it. He got out of bed. He did not wake the house. He went down the dark stairs without making them sound, his bare feet finding the silent places along the wall, and he did this without instruction, his body knowing how to move through a house that wanted him caught, and he went into the kitchen and he took a knife from the block. It was a small paring knife. He was not a fool and he was not despairing. He was a scientist with a single subject, and the subject was himself. He set the edge of the knife to the inside of his left forearm in the streetlight from the window over the sink, and before the boy in him could flinch, he drew it across, shallow, a centimeter enough. It hurt, pain was real. Whatever he was not numb, and he was glad of that, glad the way you're glad to find one true wall in a house of mirrors. The blood came up dark in the orange light, a thin bright line of it, and Harry held his arm still and watched, his heart slow and heavy, his face very calm, his whole self narrowed to the cut the way a man narrows to a sight picture. It closed, faster than the night before, much faster, as if the body asked the question twice, had decided to stop pretending it didn't know the answer. The lips of the cut drew together. The bleeding stopped as though a tap had been shut. The line went red, then pink, then the faint shine of new skin, then nothing at all, clean, whole, unmarked, in under a minute. And Harry stood in the dark kitchen with a clean knife in one hand and an unmarked arm held up to the light, and felt the floor of the world drop away beneath him and reveal a deeper floor under that, older, harder holding. He was not going to die. He turned the thought over the way the animal turned the wand over. He did not believe it the way a child believes a happy thing. He believed it the way you believe the cold by being in it. Things could hurt him. He had just proven that pain was real, but the hurting did not stick. The body undid it. The body had been built somewhere in some white room to undo it, and that building had carried across a death and a birth and 10 years of a cupboard in Surrey, and was now standing up inside an 11-year-old boy and taking the wheel. He washed the knife. He put it back in the block, edge in, the way he'd found it. He wiped the 2 drops of blood from the steel of the sink with his thumb and ran the water until they were gone. He left no record. The body that left no record on itself would leave none on the room. He went back up the silent stairs. He lay down in the smallest bedroom and put his hands behind his head and looked at the ceiling, and the fear he kept waiting for did not come, and that he understood this clearly, lying there, that was the thing he would have to watch, not the healing. The not being afraid, a boy was supposed to be afraid of a thing like this. The man in him was not afraid of anything anymore, because the man in him had used up his whole life's fear a long time ago in a place where fear bought you nothing, and what was left when the fear was gone was a flat, cold readiness that Harry could already feel settling into him like the metal had settled into those bones. He was going to a school of magic in 3 weeks. He was going to be surrounded for the first time by people who could do what he could feel waking in himself, people with power, people with curses, people who would look at the boy who lived and see a story and not a soldier. Let them, the animal said in the place under words, let them look. Harry closed his eyes. He did not dream again that night. But near morning in the gray, a single image surfaced and held. A pair of hands, his hands, but a man's, broad and scarred and certain, flexing, the knuckles set, and between them, sliding out clean and bright and final, 3 lengths of bone honed to edges, and the feeling around the image was not horror, it was homecoming. On the morning he left for King's Cross, Petunia Dursley stood in the hall and watched him drag his trunk to the door, and something in her face was not the disgust. It was fear, and it was old, and it was not entirely for herself. Your mother, she started and stopped, and Harry waited because he had learned that the things people almost said were worth more than the things they said. Your mother was, there was always something not right about all of you, you're kind. You're not, she looked at him, at the calm in him that had not been there in June, and whatever she saw made her step back half a step without knowing she did it. You're worse than she was, Petunia said finally, very low. Whatever you are, you're worse. She did not mean it as a kindness, and Harry did not take it as one, he took it as data. Goodbye, Aunt Petunia, he said, and his voice was even, and he picked up the trunk that should have been too heavy for him and was not, that had stopped being too heavy for him sometime in the last 3 weeks. And he carried it out into the gray Surrey morning toward the train and the castle and the war that was waiting for him without yet knowing his name. Behind him in the house, his aunt locked the door and put the chain on and stood with her hand flat against the wood for a long time, as if a lock could keep out the thing that had grown up in her cupboard. It couldn't, nothing could. That was the whole of it, the long and the short of it, the thing Hagrid had told him, and the thing the books had no mechanism for, and the thing the man in the white room had been built to be. Nothing could keep him out and nothing could put him down, and Harry Potter walked toward the train carrying it inside him like a second skeleton, the old warrior, the cold factor, the rage still folded and quiet, and the only person in all of magical Britain who knew it yet was him. He found the barrier at King's Cross by following his nose to the metal and magic smell of it, walked through a wall as though walls had ever stopped him, and stepped onto a scarlet platform full of children and owls and steam. A red-haired woman was shooing a brood through the crowd. A pale boy in good robes was being preened by a tall blond man whose hand never quite left his cane. A girl with a great deal of brown hair was reading a textbook as she walked and reciting under her breath, getting it perfectly right, frightened of getting it wrong. 1,000 small lives, soft and loud and unaware. Harry stood at the edge of it with his trunk and let the platform sort itself out in front of him, the exits, the crowds, the men whose hands stayed near their pockets, and felt the old animal lift its head one more time and look out through his eyes at the whole bright, unsuspecting world. Then he picked up his trunk and walked into it. He chose his compartment the way he chose everything now without seeming to choose it, near the back. One door, one window, a clear line down the corridor in both directions. He stowed the trunk and sat with his back to the engine so he was facing the way trouble would come from, and he did not know he had done any of it for a reason until the brown-haired girl slid the door open an hour out of London, and he found that he had already placed her before she spoke. 11, frightened, harmless, hear about a toad and not about him. Has anyone seen a toad? A boy named Neville's lost one. She had a voice that wanted to be older than it was. Her eyes went over the compartment and snagged, the way everyone snagged, not on the scar but on the stillness of him. People expected a boy his age to fidget. He didn't fidget. It unsettled them and they never knew why. She started, and her gaze flicked up to the scar at last, and her whole manner changed, brightened, sharpened, a clever child finding a footnote come to life. You're Harry Potter, I'm Hermione Granger. I've read about you, you're in 3 books at least. None of which were written by anyone who was there, Harry said. It stopped her. He had not meant it unkindly, and she did not take it unkindly. She took it as a problem, a closed door with an interesting lock, and he watched her decide on the spot that he was worth more attention than the toad. She came in and sat across from him, and that was the second decision of his new life. Though neither of them knew it, the first person he would let close, choosing herself, sitting down across from a thing she could not begin to measure, and being alone among all of them, unafraid in the right way, curious instead of frightened. He found he did not mind. Were you, she asked, there? I mean, you were a baby, but I don't remember it, Harry said, which was true, and did not say but I remember other things, which was also true because the snow and the white room were not hers to carry. The door opened again before she could press it, and this time the old animal at the back of Harry's skull came up off its haunches because this one was different. A pale boy, fine robes, 2 heavy-set boys flanking him like furniture that could hit you. The pale one had been taught to enter a room as though he owned the lease on it, and he looked at Hermione the way you look at something that's gotten on your shoe, and then he looked at Harry and put out a hand. They're saying down the train it's you, Harry Potter, a practiced smile, a child wearing his father's manners. Draco Malfoy, you'll want to know the right sort from the wrong sort, I can help you there. His eyes cut to Hermione, dismissing her, a small cruelty done lightly, the kind of cruelty that's been modeled at home 100 times. Harry looked at the offered hand and did not take it, and he looked past it at the 2 large boys in the doorway. And something cold and old and entirely practical ran the arithmetic of the corridor, the door, the boys' weight, the soft places, how long it would take, and then folded the arithmetic up and put it away because they were 11, and because the cold thing in him had standards even now about who was worth the trouble. I think, Harry said, I can tell the right sort from the wrong sort on my own. He said it evenly. He said it the way you'd note the weather, but there must have been something under it, something in the flat, unbothered weight of him, because Draco's smile slipped and one of the heavy boys actually shifted back a half step in the doorway, the body knowing before the mind did that the small dark boy by the window was not a boy to crowd. Harry had seen the same half step in his aunt's hallway that morning. People did not know what they were backing away from, they only knew to back away. You'll regret making the wrong friends, Potter, Draco said, recovering the words but not the ground, and gathered his furniture and went. Hermione let out a breath. He was horrible. He was taught to be, Harry said. It's not the same thing, but it ends the same place. He turned back to the window, to the country going gold and green and faster. Watch him. People like that tell you exactly what they are if you let them keep talking. He'll keep talking. Hermione looked at him for a long moment, and he could feel her revising her book of him page by page, and he let her because she was doing it honestly. You don't talk like a boy, she said at last, not as an insult, as an observation, the most truthful thing anyone had said to him all year. No, Harry agreed, I don't. She didn't ask the next question. He gave her credit for that. She stood, and at the door she paused. You should change into your robes. We'll be there soon, and Harry, whatever you are, I don't think the book got it right. I think the book wasn't even close. No, Harry said, and almost smiled and didn't, but she saw the almost, and it was enough to send her down the corridor a little less alone than she'd come. It wasn't. The dark came down over the north as the train climbed. Harry changed alone in the compartment, and in the black glass of the window he caught his own reflection over the racing dark, the small frame, the bad glasses, the scar, and behind it, for just a moment, the way you see a second face in a window when the light is wrong, he caught the other one, broad, scarred, older than any country the train was crossing. It looked back at him without surprise, the way a man looks at his own hands. Then the lights of the castle swung into the window, towers and torchlights stacked against the mountains, and the reflection was only a boy again, and a voice rolled down the train that they would arrive in 5 minutes and should leave their luggage where it was. Harry stood. He rolled his shoulders once, the way a man rolls his shoulders before work, and went out into the corridor full of children toward the doors and the dark and the lake. The train pulled into Hogsmeade at the edge of the night, north under the cold in the castle, and somewhere inside the boy stepping down onto the platform, the thing that had been Logan and was now Harry Potter, looked up at the towers and the torches and knew, the way you know weather, the way you know cold, that it had arrived at last at the only kind of place it had ever truly belonged. One with high walls and a long war in it, and enemies worth the name, and a great deal of room to find out exactly what could not kill him. The healing had woken. The rest was only a matter of time. The boats crossed the lake in the dark, and Harry sat in the bow of his and watched the castle grow until it filled the sky, and he counted the lit windows and the dark ones and marked which towers had sightlines on the water, and he did not know he was choosing where he would put archers until the thought surfaced fully formed and he had to set it down again, gently the way you set down a tool you've picked up out of an old habit. Hagrid led them up to a pair of doors that could have stopped a battering ram, and a tall witch in green met them there, and she looked over the huddle of frightened 11-year-olds with the brisk affection of a woman who has done this for 40 years. And when her eyes reached Harry they stopped the way everyone stopped, and then they did the thing only the sharp ones did, which was move past the scar to the rest of him and narrow. McGonagall had buried a great many students in her time. Something in the stillness of the boy in the second row told her she might one day bury this one too, and the thought troubled her in a way she could not name and did not have time for. "They're ready for you," she said, and opened the doors. The Great Hall took the breath out of the other children, and Harry took the Great Hall the way he took everything in pieces and exits in fields of fire. 4 long tables of staring faces, a high table of staff above them like officers above the line. A ceiling that was no ceiling at all but the open night, stars and a thin cold moon, and Harry's nose found 100 new smells in the warm air and sorted them without being asked. Candles, smoke, roast, wet stone, 400 bodies, and under all of it, faint and far up at the high table, a wrongness. He found it before he found the man it came from. A smell of rot under something sweet, garlic and lavender laid over meat going bad, and his eyes traveled the high table the way a hunter's travel a tree line and stopped on a thin man in a purple turban who was not looking at Harry and was very carefully not looking at Harry. And the moment Harry's gaze touched him the scar on his forehead lit with a thin needle of pain, quick, surgical, there and gone. The animal at the back of his skull came all the way awake and bared its teeth at the purple turban. Not now, Harry told it in the place under words, and the animal subsided, but it kept the man marked, the way you mark the one tree a sniper would choose. They put a stool in front of the hall and an old hat on the stool, and the hat sang, and Harry didn't listen to the song. He listened to the room. He watched which staff laughed and which didn't. He watched the old man in the center of the high table, the one with the long silver beard and the half-moon glasses, the one everyone deferred to without being told, and he watched the old man watch the children, benevolent, twinkling, and he saw underneath the twinkle the flat assessing patience of a man moving pieces, and Harry knew that look too. He had been moved by men who wore it. The beard didn't change what it was. Names were called. Children went up, sat, were sorted, ran to their tables to applause. When McGonagall called Potter Harry, the hall did the thing he'd been told it would do, the rush of whispers, the craning necks, and Harry walked to the stool the way he'd walked Diagon Alley unhurried, reading the room, and sat, and the hat came down over his eyes and shut out the staring hall, and went silent, a long time silent. "Well," said a small voice against the inside of his skull, and there was no twinkle in it. Well, this is new." Harry said nothing. He had learned long ago that the first one to talk gives the most away. "I have sorted children for 1,000 years, the hat said slowly, and it had stopped performing, all the song gone out of it. "I have looked into a great many minds. I have never looked into one and found a battlefield looking back. How old are you, boy?" 11, Harry thought. "You know that. Your name is 11, the hat said. "You are not 11. There's a man in here. There's more than a man." It hesitated, and Harry felt it recoil from something the way a hand recoils from a stove. "There are deaths in here, yours, so many of them yours. You have died and died and died, and you have come back every time, and you came back this time too, didn't you, into this small body, and you are waking up." A pause. "Does anyone know?" "No," Harry thought, "and it stays that way." "It will not stay that way," the hat said almost gently. "A thing like you does not stay hidden. You'll burn through this school like a fire through dry grass. The question is only which way the wind takes you." It turned over inside his mind, and Harry let it because there was nothing in there it could take that the thing inside him hadn't already survived. "Not Hufflepuff, you'd break their hearts. Not Ravenclaw, though you've the mind for it. You don't think to know, you think to win. Slytherin would use you, and you would let them think they were using you, and then one day you would be done with them. There's the cunning for it. There's the cold," the hat seemed to sigh. "But that's not where you'll do the most good, and whatever you are, boy, I find strangely that I want you to do good, so." "Gryffindor." It shouted the last word to the hall, and the hall erupted, the red and gold table roaring, but inside, just for Harry, the hat said one thing more, quiet under the noise. "They cannot kill you, I've seen that, so be careful, son, for their sake, not yours, what you decide to do with men who cannot stop you. That is the only war you can lose." Then McGonagall lifted the hat away, and the noise rushed back in, and Harry stood. And as he stood, his eyes went one last time to the high table, to the purple turban, and found the thin man finally looking at him. And behind the thin man's nervous smile something else looked out, something old and hungry and afraid, and the scar on Harry's brow burned bright and cold, and Harry held the gaze across the whole length of the hall and did not look away first. He went and sat with the lions. Hermione made room beside her without being asked, and there was relief in her face that he'd come to the same table, and Harry sat and let the feast happen around him and ate like a man who has learned never to waste a meal. And across the hall a pale boy at the Slytherin table caught his eye and looked quickly away, and up at the high table a thin man in a turban pressed 2 fingers to his own temple as though it pained him. And an old man with a silver beard watched the boy who lived eat his supper with an expression that was almost, but not quite, grandfatherly. That night, in a four-poster bed in a round tower room in clean sheets that smelled of lavender and dust, Harry lay awake and listened to four boys breathe their way down into sleep, and when the room was deep and still he held his right hand up in the dark above his face and looked at the spaces between his knuckles. He thought about pressure from the inside. He thought about 3 points wanting out. He did not try to make it happen. The animal had told him in the place under words that it would happen when it was needed and not before, that you did not draw the blade to look at it, that a thing like him kept its edge sheathed until the moment came, and the moment had not come. But it was coming. He could feel it coming the way you feel weather. Somewhere in this castle was a thin man with a rotted smell and a thing behind his eyes. And somewhere beyond the castle were people who would not believe what Harry was until they had tried to kill him and failed, and they would try because that was what the world did with a thing it couldn't put down. It tried and tried and tried. Let them, the animal said, drowsy now, content, home at last in a place with a war in it. Harry lowered his hand. He closed his eyes. And for the first time in 11 years of life and however many lifetimes before it, he slept the whole night through without dreaming, deep and dark and dreamless, a warrior resting between one battle and the next, healing in his sleep the way he healed in everything, gathering himself in the dark of the oldest fortress in Britain for the long, bright violence that was, even now, on its way to meet him. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, Claws in Memory. Hogwarts ran on bells and Harry learned to read them the way he read everything, which was as a system that could be used or beaten. By the end of the first week he knew the castle better than boys who had grown up hearing about it. He knew which staircases lied and when. He knew the patrol routes of the caretaker and the cat that walked them with him. He knew that the 7th floor corridor on the right was forbidden and therefore worth knowing. And he knew the smell of every teacher who passed him in the halls, and one of those smells made the animal at the back of his skull come up snarling every single time. Quirrell, defense against the dark arts. The man stuttered and flinched and wore his fear like a costume, and Harry had spent his whole life among people who hid behind performances, and he knew a costume when he smelled one. Under the lavender and the garlic the man rotted. Under the stutter something old waited, patient, and every time Harry sat in that classroom the scar on his brow burned its thin cold needle, and every time the thing behind Quirrell's eyes turned toward him like a compass needle finding north. It knows me, Harry thought the third day, watching the turban man drop his chalk and fumble for it with shaking hands, and I know it, we just don't know how yet. He did not raise his hand in that class. He did not raise his hand in any class. He sat at the back where he could see the door and he learned and he said nothing, and the teachers came in two kinds about it. Some, like little Flitwick, beamed at the quiet boy who turned in flawless work and never boasted. Others read the silence as insolence. Chief among those was Snape. Potions lived in the dungeons, which Harry approved of on instinct. Stone, one way indefensible, and the man who taught it came into the room like a blade coming out of a sheath, black robes snapping, and his eyes found Harry in the back row and fixed there with a hatred so pure and so immediate that Harry felt the animal stir, interested, because hatred that clean was almost always about something other than you. Ah yes, Snape said softly into the silence he had made. Harry Potter. Our new celebrity, the word was a small knife. Tell me, Potter, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? Hermione's hand was in the air beside him, trembling with the need to be asked. Harry didn't look at her. He looked at Snape and he held the man's eyes, and into the spaces between Harry's knuckles came that old familiar pressure, 3 points wanting out because the body did not distinguish well yet between a man who wanted to humiliate you and a man who wanted to kill you. He breathed through it. He kept his hands flat on the desk. I don't know, sir, Harry said evenly, but I'd guess you already know I don't and asked anyway, so this isn't about asphodel. The dungeon went very still. Snape's expression did not change, but something flickered far back in his black eyes, and it was not anger, quite. It was recognition, the same recognition Harry kept finding in the sharp ones, Ollivander, McGonagall, the hat, the sense of a man who has just put his hand on what he thought was a child and found a load-bearing wall. Detention, Potter, Snape said softly, for your cheek and 10 points from Gryffindor. He turned away in a snap of robes. Perhaps fame isn't everything. Harry served the detention. He scrubbed cauldrons without complaint, and Snape watched him do it from the dark of the room, and neither of them spoke, and at the end Snape said, You look at me as though you are measuring me for a grave. No, sir, Harry said, drying his hands. I look at everyone like that. You're not special. He met the man's eyes one last time. You hated my father. It's in your face when you say the name. Whatever he did to you, I didn't do it, and I'm not him. But you'll spend a year trying to make me into him so you can hate me clean. It won't work. I'm something he never was. He left Snape standing in the dark of the dungeon with that, and behind him the potions master sank slowly into his chair and sat for a long time with his hands pressed to his face, and what he was thinking Harry neither knew nor cared. The animal had taken the man's measure, bitter, brilliant, dangerous, but bent toward something other than Harry's death, not an enemy yet. There were worse things in the castle. Hermione found him in the library, which was where he spent the hours other children spent being children. She put a book down across from his and sat the way she'd sat in the train compartment, choosing it, and looked at him with the expression he'd come to know, the clever face working a lock. You're not what they say, she said. I've been watching, a faint flush admitting it. You don't do the work, you absorb it. You read a chapter once and you have it. Professor Flitwick said a charm it took me 3 days to manage, and you did it the first try and looked almost bored. And you sit like, she hunted for the word, like you're waiting for something to come through the door. Something usually does, Harry said. That's not an answer. No, he closed his book. He looked at her, at the honest, stubborn cleverness of her, the one person in this castle who decided to find him out by paying attention rather than by being afraid, and he made a decision that he would not have made for anyone else, which was to give her one true thing. "I don't remember being a baby in Godric's Hollow," he said, "but I remember things that aren't from this life, cold places, a war, being hurt in ways that should have killed me and not dying. I've remembered them since the summer, since the wand, and they're getting clearer, and I don't have a name for what they are except that they're mine." He watched her take it. "That's the truth, and it's more than I've told anyone, and if you repeat it I'll know it was you because you're the only one I've told, so—" She didn't laugh, she didn't back away. She did the thing that made him, against every habit of 100 lifetimes, begin to trust her. She got very still and thought about it hard, and then she said, "Like reincarnation. There are theories, most of the literature thinks it's impossible, magic doesn't carry the self across death, the self is, but there are case studies they don't have mechanisms for." Her eyes were bright. "You're a case study they don't have a mechanism for, like the killing curse, like Godric's Hollow." She sat back. "Harry, the same thing keeps being true about you. The books don't have a mechanism." "No," Harry said, and almost smiled, and this time let it through a little because she'd earned it. "They don't." It was the beginning of the only friendship he would keep that year, and it was built on the only foundation that ever held for a man like him, someone who looked at the worst, truest thing about him and leaned in instead of away. The thing he had been waiting to come through the door came through it on Halloween, and it came as a troll. Afterward, the story would be that a mountain troll had got into the castle, that it was a prank or a breach or worse, and the staff would argue about how, and only Harry would notice that the troll had been let in low in the dungeons and had somehow wandered up 3 floors to the exact corridor where a girl was crying alone in a bathroom, and only Harry would do the arithmetic and arrive at a thin man in a turban who needed the staff looking the wrong way for an hour. But that was later. In the moment there was only the bell of the feast, and Quirrell bursting in white face to scream about a troll and faint, and 400 children panicking, and one fact that cut through all of it for Harry like a blade through water: Hermione wasn't in the hall. He had clocked it an hour ago. She'd run off after potions and tears because someone had been cruel and she had nowhere to put it, and he had meant to find her after the feast, and now there was a troll loose in a castle, and the one person in it he decided to keep was alone and didn't know. He went out the doors of the great hall against the tide of children, the way a salmon goes upstream, the way a man goes toward the sound of the guns, and no one stopped him because no one in that crowd was looking at anything but their own feet, and Harry put his nose into the cold stone air and ran. He smelled it before he saw it. Troll was a stench like a slaughterhouse left in the sun, like a sewer with a heartbeat, and over the top of it, fine and sharp and unmistakable, the smell of Hermione's fear. He followed both up a staircase and down a corridor, and the smells led to the same place, which meant the troll had found her, and Harry stopped thinking in words. The animal took the wheel. He came around the corner into the girls' bathroom at a dead sprint, and the scene printed itself on him in a single frozen instant the way these scenes always did. The troll, 12 feet of gray muscle and stink with a club the size of a man, the sink smashed, the water everywhere, and Hermione backed into the corner under the windows with her wand out and her face white and her mouth open on a scream she was too frightened to finish. The club was already coming down. It was coming down where she stood, and it was going to turn her into a smear on the stone, and there was no spell in the world, Harry knew, that would stop 12 feet of troll mid-swing, and so he did not reach for a spell. He reached for the only weapon a man always has, which is himself, and he threw himself between the club and the girl. The club caught him across the chest and the world went white. He felt ribs go. He felt his body leave the floor and cross the room and hit the stone wall hard enough to crack it. And he heard distantly Hermione finally finish her scream, and he slid down the wall, and the pain was enormous, total, a sun going off in his chest, and through the white of it the animal said, "Calm as a winter morning, get up." So he got up. That was the thing none of them ever understood, the thing the books had no mechanism for, the thing that made him what he was. The pain did not stop him because the pain had never been the question. He got his feet under him with a chest full of broken ribs, and he stood, and the troll, which had already written him off as dead the way everything always wrote him off as dead, turned back toward the girl in the corner. And Harry felt the pressure come into his hands, 3 points, each one wanting out. This time he did not breathe through it, this time he did not sheathe it. This time the moment had come, the moment the animal had promised him on his first night in the tower, and he opened his hands and let it happen, and the bone came through. It came through the skin between his knuckles in 3 lines of agony and revelation, 3 lengths of his own honed bone sliding out wet and white and final, 6 in all across his 2 fists, and the pain of it was its own white sun, and he did not care because the instant they were out, the instant he felt their weight and their reach, a door in the back of his skull that had been straining for months blew off its hinges and everything came through. He was Logan. He was James Howlett in a cold house in a cold country a century and more ago, watching his life end and another begin in a spray of blood and the first terrible push of bone through a child's hands. He was a soldier in trenches that smelled of this same mud, this same iron. He was a thing in a tank of green water while men in white coats poured metal into his bones. He was 100 deaths, drowned, burned, shot, frozen, blown apart, and each time the slow dragging climbed back up into a body that would not let him stay gone. He had buried everyone. He had loved and lost across a span of years that no single human heart was built to hold, and he had held it anyway because the body that wouldn't die made you keep holding it whether you could or not. He was rage refined across lifetimes into something cold and exact. He was grief the same way. He was a warrior so old and so used that war was the only language he was truly fluent in. And underneath all of it, holding all of it, was a single iron fact that had carried him through every death and into this small new body in a castle in Scotland. He could not be put down, and the people he loved could. And one of them was in the corner behind him, and the troll was raising its club again. Harry crossed the bathroom. He did not run at the troll like a boy. He moved like the thing he was, low and fast and economical. And he went up the troll's body the way you climb a wall you mean to bring down, and the claws went in. He drove all three of his right hand into the back of the troll's knee and felt the joint come apart, and the troll bellowed and buckled. And as it came down, he was already moving off the falling leg and up the back, and he put the claws into the base of the thing's skull where the spine met the head, the one place that ended even a troll, and he wrenched, and the bellows stopped. 12 feet of troll hit the flooded floor like a dropped building, and the water went up in a sheet, and then there was only the drip of the broken sinks and Harry standing on the troll's back with bone claws out and dripping, and his chest knitting itself back together under his torn robes, the ribs grinding into place, the white sun of the pain fading to an ember and then to nothing, healed whole, while a girl in the corner stared at him with her hands over her mouth. He turned and looked at Hermione. For a long moment neither of them moved. The water spread around the dead troll. Harry stood over it, 11 years old, small and soaked and torn, with 3 blades of his own bone sliding out of each fist and the last of 100 lifetimes settling behind his 2 old eyes, and he watched the girl he'd just saved decide what to do with what she'd seen. She didn't scream, she didn't run. She lowered her hands from her mouth, and her clever, frightened face worked through terror and arrived, the way it always arrived, at the only thing that ever held her, the need to understand. "Harry," she whispered, "your hands." He looked down at them. The claws gleamed wet in the torchlight, bone honed to edges, the warrior's truth made plain. He thought about lying. He thought about how he would explain 6 holes punched clean through a troll's anatomy. He thought about the door that had blown off its hinges in his skull and everything that had come through it, and he found he was tired of carrying it alone, even an hour into having it, and Hermione had run toward him in the train and chosen the seat across from him and leaned in at the worst true thing instead of away, so he didn't lie. "They come from inside," Harry said quietly. "They always have, I just remembered how." He flexed his hands once and the claws slid back through his knuckles, gone, the skin sealing over them clean and whole, and he held his unmarked fists up for her to see, and her eyes went wide and wet. "I'm not a boy, Hermione, I told you that on the train. There's a man in here who's lived a long time and died a lot of times and can't seem to manage it permanently. He woke up tonight, all the way." He stepped down off the troll's back into the cold water. "He's not going to let anything in this castle put a hand on you again." She crossed the room and she did not touch his hands, which he understood and was grateful for. She stood in front of him, soaked and shaking, and she looked up into the face that was a boy's face with something far older looking out of it, and Hermione Granger, who was the cleverest student of her year and would be the cleverest of her age, said the only thing there was to say. "Okay," she said, her voice cracked and steadied. "Okay. Then we'd better make sure no one else finds out, because if the whole school knew what I just saw." She stopped. Her quick mind ran ahead of her down a corridor neither of them could see the end of. "They'd be afraid of you, and people do dangerous things when they're afraid." "Yes," Harry said, "they do." Footsteps were coming fast, many of them, the staff at last, drawn by the noise and the troll's death bellow, and Harry heard them 3 corridors out and had time, and he used it. He gripped Hermione by the shoulders gently and looked her in the eye. "When they get here," he said, "the troll cornered us. You held it off with a leg locker and I got it in the head with a club. It dropped. We were lucky. That's the story. It's a good story because it's almost true and it makes us small, and you always want to be small in front of people with power until you've decided you don't. Can you tell it?" She swallowed. She nodded. The cleverness in her had already taken the shape of the lie and was reinforcing it, finding the corroborating details, and he could have kissed her for it. This girl who'd been a stranger a month ago and was now the only person alive who knew what he was. "Good," Harry said, and let her go and stepped back into the role of an 11-year-old boy who had gotten lucky, and arranged his torn robes over ribs that had been broken and were now whole. And when McGonagall and Snape and Quirrell came skidding into the flooded bathroom, what they found was 2 first-years standing shaken beside an impossibly dead mountain troll with a story that didn't quite add up and no way to prove it didn't. McGonagall was white with fury and relief. Snape's black eyes went over the scene and stopped on the troll's skull, on the wound there, and narrowed, because Snape was not a fool and a dropped club does not make 6 clean punctures, but he said nothing, the way they all said nothing about Harry Potter. And Quirrell at the back by the door stared at the dead troll he had loosed into the castle to cover something else entirely, and stared at the boy who should have been a smear on the wall and was instead standing whole in the wreckage, and the thing behind his eyes looked out through them at Harry, and Harry's scar lit cold and bright, and across the ruined bathroom the boy who could not die and the wraith who refused to look at each other and understood, both of them in the same instant, that the war between them had just found its second soldier, 50 points to Gryffindor in the end for sheer dumb luck and not dying. Harry took the points in the lecture and the relief, and he walked Hermione back toward the tower with the rest of the shaken students. And the whole way her hand stayed near his sleeve, not touching, just near, the way you stay near a fire on a cold night, and Harry let her and felt under the iron and the grief and the 100 buried deaths something he had not let himself feel in lifetimes. Not alone. It was a dangerous thing to feel. It gave the world a place to hurt him. The man in him knew that better than anyone who had ever lived. But the man in him had also learned, across all those deaths, that a life with no one in it was just a longer way of being dead, and he had been dead enough. So he let the girl walk near his sleeve, and he marked the thin man in the turban for what was coming, and he went up to the tower with the door blown off its hinges in his skull and 100 lifetimes of war finally fully awake behind his eyes. And that night, for the first time, Harry Potter lay in the dark and did not wonder what he was. He knew he was Wolverine. He had always been Wolverine. And the wizarding world had just put a mountain troll in his path to see what he'd do, and what he'd done was kill it with his hands and walk away whole. And that was only the first of them, only the very first. And somewhere in the castle the men who moved pieces were beginning, all of them, to understand that they had a problem with no mechanism and no name. Good, the animal said, sheathed and quiet and content. Let them understand. And Harry slept. The school did not know what it had after the troll, but it knew it had something. The official story held a leg locker, a dropped club, 2 lucky first years, and the official story was believed by the people who wanted to believe it, which was most of them, because most people prefer a small true enough thing to a large frightening one. But there were always the others, the ones who looked twice, and Harry watched them look. A 7th-year prefect who had seen the wound in the troll's skull and gone quiet. A portrait in the 3rd-floor corridor that whispered to other portraits when Harry passed. And Snape, who had said nothing and missed nothing, and who now watched Harry in the dungeons with an attention that had changed its flavor, still hatred, but hatred with a thread of calculation running through it, the look of a man revising his estimate of a threat. Harry let them all look. He had decided the night of the troll that the secret would not survive Hogwarts, and a thing that will not survive is a thing you spend rather than hoard. So he gave them small confirmations, here and there, nothing they could prove, a fall down a moving staircase that should have broken an ankle and didn't, a quill cut that closed while a classmate stared, and he let the rumors grow at the edges because a reputation the warrior knew was its own kind of armor, and the version of Harry Potter that the school whispered about was a version that the school's small cruelties left alone. You're cultivating it, Hermione said in the library, watching him let a paper-cut seal in front of a wide-eyed second year who fled the moment Harry looked up. The fear, you're feeding it on purpose. A little, Harry admitted. Not too much and they panic, and panic brings the staff, and the staff bring the ministry before I'm ready for the ministry, but enough. He turned a page. When one of the people I was first learned what he could do, he hid it. Spent years hiding it, and the hiding cost him everything, because a thing you hide is a thing other people get to define for you in the dark where you can't argue. I'm not doing that again. If they're going to have a story about me, I'd rather it be one I shaped than one they invented. He looked at her. The trick with fear, Hermione, is the same as the trick with a fire. You don't put it out and you don't let it spread, you bank it. You keep it just hot enough to warm you and not so hot it burns the house down. I've had a long time to learn how to bank a fire. She absorbed it the way she absorbed everything, and then she said the thing that made her worth keeping. And the people you actually care about, the ones you don't want afraid of you, how do you bank it for them? Harry was quiet for a moment. It was the right question, the one under the question, and she was the only person who would have thought to ask it. I don't, he said. For them I let it all the way out and trust them not to run. It's the most dangerous thing I do. It's why I've only done it once in this life. He met her eyes. You're the once. She didn't look away. She never looked away. That was the whole of it. That night, alone in the room the castle gave him, Harry put the claws out and drew them back, out and back, and in the rhythm of it a memory surfaced, unbidden, the way they did, not a war this time, but after a war, a small house in a country whose name had changed 3 times since, and a woman teaching him to bank a fire in a stone hearth, her hands over his, showing him how to bury the coals so they'd hold their heat through the night. He had loved her. He could not, across the gap of 100 years and a death in a new body, remember her face, only her hands in the fire and the particular grief of having outlived the house and the country and the woman, all 3. The memory came with its grief bolted on, the way they all did, and Harry stood in the room the castle gave him and let it come and let it go and banked it the way she had taught him, the way he had been teaching himself for 100 years. Then he drew the claws one more time and looked at them in the low light and put them away and went up to the tower to sleep, and the castle settled around him in the dark, old and patient and keeping its own secrets as it had kept them for 1,000 years and would keep his a while longer yet. In the headmaster's office, very late, an old man stood at his window and watched the grounds and did not sleep. Albus Dumbledore had spent the evening doing arithmetic of his own. A troll in the castle on Halloween was not an accident, and he knew it was not an accident, and he had spent the hours since the feast quietly establishing that the 3rd-floor corridor was undisturbed and the thing it guarded was safe, and arriving at the conclusion that the troll had been a distraction and that whoever had wanted the distraction had gotten exactly the hour they paid for. He had his suspicions about who. He kept them the way he kept everything, behind the half-moon glasses and the grandfatherly twinkle, but it was not the troll that kept him at the window, it was the boy. Albus had read Minerva's account 3 times. He had read Severus's Tercer 1 with its single underlined sentence about the wound in the troll's skull. He had looked at the boy himself in the hospital wing, where Harry had submitted to Madame Pomfrey's examination with a patience no 11-year-old possessed and walked out without so much as a bruise, and Albus had felt, standing over him, the thing the Sorting Hat had felt, the thing Ollivander had written to him about in a letter that summer in his cramped old hand. The Potter boy is wrong, Albus. The wand chose him the way a sword chooses, and his hands watch his hands. A weapon was forming in his castle. Albus had known a weapon would form, the prophecy promised it. He had arranged the boy's whole childhood toward the making of it. The hard years at Privet Drive that would, he had told himself, keep the boy humble and bendable and ready to be guided when the time came. He had planned for a weapon. He had not planned for a weapon that could not be sacrificed. That was the part Albus turned over now at the dark window, the part he told no one, the part that was the rotten beam in the whole house of his design. Because the prophecy, as Albus alone understood it, required at the end a death, the boy's death, freely walked into, the only way to strip the Dark Lord of the protection he had stolen. Albus had built his entire long game on a single terrible certainty, that when the hour came, Harry Potter would have to die and could be made to, and that Albus would be the one to lead him gently to it for the good of all. And tonight a mountain troll had broken the boy's ribs against a stone wall, and the boy had stood up and killed the troll with his hands and walked away whole. You cannot lead a thing to a sacrifice it cannot make. Albus Dumbledore stood at his window for a long time, and the twinkle was gone from his eyes, and what was left was the flat, cold arithmetic of a man who has built his life on a plan and just watched the foundation crack, and he thought with the first true fear he had felt in years, what have I been given to work with? And what do I do with a boy that even death won't take? He did not have an answer. He went on not having one for a long time. But the question changed him from that night, the way a question can, and the change was this. From Halloween forward, Albus Dumbledore stopped watching Harry Potter the way a grandfather watches a grandson, and started watching him the way a man watches a fire he has built too close to the house and could not now put out. Another room far below, behind a door no student was meant to open, a thin man in a turban knelt on cold stone and unwound the cloth from his head and spoke to the face on the back of his own skull. He should be dead, master, Quirrell whispered. The troll, I have used trolls before, they are reliable, they leave nothing. His ribs were broken, I saw the wall crack, and he stood up, he killed it. With his hands, master, there was bone, I saw bone come out of his hands. I know what you saw. The voice that answered came from the back of his head, high and cold and thin as a wire, and it was thinking. Harry would have recognized the quality of the silence, the quality of a mind doing arithmetic. I felt it through the boy's scar. There is a piece of me in that child, Quirinus, you know this, and tonight that piece woke and screamed, and what it screamed was not the screaming of a thing that fears death. It was the screaming of a thing that has stopped. A pause, cold and total. He did not survive my curse as an infant because of his mother's love. That was the story I let myself believe because every other story was worse. Tonight I have the worst story. Master, there is a kind of creature, Quirinus, very rare, that does not heal. It unhappens. You cut it and the cut leaves. You break it and the break leaves. You kill it and the death leaves. The voice had gone very soft, and under the softness was the first thread of something Lord Voldemort had not felt in a long time and did not have a comfortable name for. I built my immortality on a single law, that death can be cheated but not defied, that if you anchor your soul, the body may die 1,000 times and you remain. My whole work, Quirinus, every Horcrux, every year I have clawed back from the dark, all of it rests on the bedrock that death is real, that it holds, that it is a door you can wedge but not abolish. The thin man waited, shaking. And there is a boy in this castle, Voldemort said, for whom death does not hold, not a soul anchored against it, a body that simply refuses it. Do you understand what that is, Quirinus? Do you understand what it is to a man like me? No, master. It is the one thing in all the world I cannot use, cannot bargain with, and cannot defeat by the only means I have ever trusted. I have spent 30 years making myself the thing that does not die, and the universe, which has a sense of humor I have never appreciated, has answered me with a child who is already that and better at it, and 11 years old, and on the side of the people I intend to kill. The voice dropped to almost nothing. Get the stone, Quirinus, get it quickly. I want a body of my own before that boy grows into what he is going to grow into, because I have just understood something tonight that I will spend the rest of my long life acting upon. What, master? That for the first time since I was a boy in an orphanage, said Lord Voldemort, I am afraid. And on the floor above, in a round tower bed, Harry Potter's scar flared once, bright and cold, and in his sleep he smiled the way an old soldier smiles when he hears, far off, that the enemy has finally learned to be afraid of him. He began to train the next morning, and he trained the way he did everything now, in secret and in earnest. He found rooms the castle had forgotten, and the castle, it turned out, would show them to a boy who needed them, opening a door in a blank wall on the 7th floor into a space that became whatever he required. He filled it with what the warrior in him knew how to use, a pell to strike weighted dummies, distance to move through. He did not practice magic there. Magic he practiced in class, absorbing it the way Hermione had said once and held. In the room that the castle gave him, he practiced the older thing, the thing magic would be bolted onto, the thing 100 lifetimes had made him, how to move, how to close distance, how to end a fight before the other man knew it had started. The claws he practiced last and most carefully alone with the door shut. They hurt every time. He'd thought that first week that the pain might fade with use, the way the ache of a worked muscle fades, and he learned it did not. Every time the bone came through the skin, it tore the skin, and every time the skin healed around the wet bone, and every time the blade slid back, the holes closed over and the hands were whole again. And every single time it was its own small white sun of agony, 6 little suns across 2 fists, and Harry stood in the room the castle gave him and put the claws out and drew them back, out and back, out and back, 100 times an evening. Teaching his body to do on command the thing it had once only done in extremity, and he did not let himself flinch, because a weapon you flinch to draw is a weapon you will hesitate with, and hesitation was the one luxury a man in a war could not afford. Hermione found out he was doing it because Hermione found out everything, and she came to the room one evening and stood in the doorway and watched him drive the claws through his own knuckles for the 40th time that night, watched the blood in the bone and the healing, and went pale and did not leave. "It hurts you," she said, "every time, doesn't it?" "Yes," Harry said, and put them out again and drew them back, out and back. "Then why?" "Because the day I need them, I can't be thinking about the pain. The pain has to be a wall I walk through without noticing it's there. Out back. There's no spell for that, Hermione, there's no shortcut, you just do it until your body stops asking permission." He flexed his fists and the blood ran and stopped and the skin sealed, and he held the whole hands up to her, unmarked, the trick of it, the horror of it, the gift of it. "Everyone in this castle is learning to wave a stick and say words. I'm learning the only thing that's ever actually kept anyone." He stopped. "Let it go," went on. "The only thing that's ever actually worked." She came into the room. She sat down on the edge of a weighted dummy and watched him work, and she didn't try to stop him, and that he would understand this later, across whatever lifetimes were left to him. That was the moment she became more than the only person who knew. She became the only person who stayed while he did the hard, ugly, necessary thing and didn't ask him to be gentler than the world was going to be. "What was it like?" she asked quietly after a while. "Dying, you said you'd done it a lot." Harry stopped, the claws half out, and considered the question which no one had ever asked him and which he had never let himself answer even in the privacy of his own skull. "Cold," he said finally. "Every time, not the dying, the coming back. The dying's nothing, the dying's a door, it's the coming back that's cold, because you come back into a body that's been built to keep you and you remember all at once every reason you didn't want to stay, and there they all are still waiting for you, and you have to pick the whole life up again and carry it." He drew the claws back, the skin healed, he looked at his whole hands. "100 times I've had to pick it up again, and every time I think this is the time I won't be able to. And every time the body just stands up, whether I want it to or not." He looked at her. "That's the part the books don't have a mechanism for, Hermione, not the healing, the staying. The body won't let me leave, and I've stopped mostly wanting to, but it took a long time. It took longer than your whole country's been a country." She didn't say she was sorry, he was grateful for that too. She just sat with it, the cleverest girl of her age, holding the weight of a thing no 11-year-old should have been able to hold, holding it because he'd handed it to her, and she decided, the way she decided everything, that the right thing to do with a hard truth was to refuse to look away. "Then I'll stay too," Hermione said, "while you do this, so you're not doing it alone." She set her jaw. "That's the part I have a mechanism for." And Harry Potter, who had buried everyone he had ever loved across more years than any heart was built to hold, looked at the girl who had decided to stay, and felt the iron in his chest crack the smallest, most dangerous, most welcome amount, and put the claws away and sat down on the floor of the room the castle had given him and let one person, for the first time in lifetimes, simply be there while he was what he was. Outside, the year turned toward winter. In the dungeons, a wraith counted the days until it could move on the stone. In a high office, an old man watched a fire he could not put out and recalculated a plan with a cracked foundation. And in a forgotten room on the 7th floor, a boy who could not die taught his hands to do the impossible on command, with one friend sitting beside him in the lamplight, and got ready the only way he knew how for the war that everyone in the castle could now feel coming, and only one of them had ever truly been. The claws had come, the memory had returned, the warrior was awake. Now they would all find out, one by one, exactly what that meant. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3, The Unkillable Boy. The thing about a secret is that it wants out, and the thing about a boy who cannot die is that the world keeps trying to kill him, and sooner or later the two facts meet in public. For Harry, it happened at Quidditch in front of the school. He had not wanted to play. The warrior in him had looked at the game's children on broomsticks chasing a ball 100 feet over hard ground, and assessed it as an excellent way to break your neck for no tactical gain. But McGonagall had seen him move during flying lessons, seen the way his body went where it intended without negotiation, and she had wanted him for her house team the way a general wants a rare soldier, and Harry had let himself be wanted because a seeker had reasons to be alone in the air 100 feet up, and a boy who needed reasons to be where the staff couldn't see him took the reasons he was offered. So he was in the air over the pitch on a clear, cold November Saturday, the whole school below him in the stands, when his broom tried to kill him. It started as a buck, then a shudder. Then the broom was no longer a thing he sat on, but a thing that wanted him off, twisting and rolling and climbing against everything he told it. And Harry felt at once that this was not the broom failing, this was the broom cursed. Something was holding it and shaking it the way a terrier shakes a rat. And his nose, even at that height, even in that wind, caught the thread of it across the pitch, the rotted sweet smell, garlic and decay. Coming from the staff stand where a thin man in a turban sat very still and stared. Quirrell, of course Quirrell. The troll hadn't worked, so now this in the open in front of everyone, a seeker falling from 100 feet being the most ordinary tragedy in the sport, a thing that would draw no questions at all. Harry had a half-second to make a choice, and he made it the way the warrior made everything, cold and fast and complete. He could fight the broom. He could probably win eventually with enough wrenching and survive the day as the boy who'd had a scare and keep his secret one more week. Or he could let it happen. He let it happen. He understood in that half second exactly what he was choosing. He was choosing to stop hiding. He was choosing to let 400 people watch what he was, because the secret was a cage and the cage had stopped being worth its walls. Because every week he spent pretending to be killable was a week the men who moved pieces got to plan around a lie, and because some cold ancient instinct in him had decided that the time for being small in front of people with power was over, that he had let them think him fragile long enough. And that there was a kind of war you won not by hiding your strength but by showing it so completely that the enemy's whole strategy died in a single afternoon. So when the broom gave its final savage buck and threw him off into the open air 100 feet above the frozen pitch, Harry Potter did not scream and did not flail and did not reach for his wand. He fell. The whole school came to its feet. Hermione in the Gryffindor stand had her hands pressed to her mouth and her eyes shut, because she alone in all that crowd knew what was about to happen and could not bear to watch it and could not look away. The drop took perhaps 3 seconds. Harry spent them well. He turned in the air the way the body knew how to turn, got his feet under him and his knees soft, because even a thing that heals would rather start a healing from a better position than a worse one, and he hit the frozen ground of the pitch feet first at the speed of a falling stone and the sound of it carried to the top of the stands. Both legs shattered. He felt the femurs go and the shins and his pelvis crack, and the impact drove up through him and he went down in a heap on the white grass, and for a moment the whole pitch was utterly silent, 400 people staring at the broken body of the boy who lived, who had just fallen 100 feet and would now surely, finally, be only a boy after all. And Harry, lying in the wreck of his own legs with the cold ground under his cheek, breathed once and let the body do what the body did and stood up. It was not graceful. He would think about that later, that he could have made it graceful and chose not to because grace would have looked like a trick and he wanted no one in that stadium to be able to tell themselves it was a trick. So he let them see it. He let them see the legs reset, the femurs grinding back into line under his torn trousers, the shins straightening, the pelvis knitting with a sound like green wood, the whole architecture of him rebuilding itself in the space of 10 seconds while he climbed, joint by impossible joint, back up on 2 legs that had been splinters when he hit. He stood up out of his own death the way a man stands up out of deep water, and he turned to face the stands, and he spread his arms, and he let 400 people look at him standing whole on the ground that should have killed him. No one applauded. That was the thing about real fear, it had no applause in it. The stadium simply stared, in a silence so total Harry could hear the wind in the goalposts. And into that silence Harry Potter looked up at the staff stand, at the thin man in the turban who had gone the color of old paper, and held his gaze, and let the man understand that the secret was over and the war was open and the first move had just failed in front of the whole school. Then he walked off the pitch on his own 2 reborn legs, past the silent stands, past Madame Hooch with her whistle frozen at her lips, past Hermione who had come down out of the Gryffindor stand and was waiting for him at the edge of the grass with tears standing in her eyes and her chin up, refusing to cry where they could see, and the 2 of them walked back toward the castle together, and behind them 400 people began all at once to talk. By dinner the whole school knew. By the next morning the whole castle was a different place, and Harry moved through it the way he'd always moved, reading rooms, marking exits, except that now the rooms read him back. Conversations stopped when he entered, first years scattered. Older students who had ignored the famous boy now watched him with the specific wide-eyed attention people give to a thing they have decided is dangerous, and Harry let them because the warrior in him knew that fear was a kind of armor if you wore it right, and he intended to wear it right. "You did that on purpose," Hermione said low over breakfast he barely touched. "You could have fought the broom, I've seen you fly, you let it throw you." "Yes, why?" "Because hiding was costing more than it was buying." He looked down the Gryffindor table at the faces turned and quickly turning away. "As long as they thought I was killable, the man behind this, and it's a man, Hermione, I can smell him, got to plan around a Harry Potter who breaks. Now he has to plan around the real one. It changes every equation he's running. It makes him afraid, and afraid men make mistakes, and I'd rather fight a man making mistakes than a man with a plan." He finally ate something because the body that healed ran on fuel and he never wasted a meal. "And there's the rest of them, the ministry, they'll have heard by tonight. I'd rather they came at me knowing what I am than thinking they could handle me quietly. Quiet is how they make people disappear, loud is how I stay alive in the open." He set down his fork. "I've done this before in other lives. The trick isn't to be the strongest in the room. Trick is to make sure everyone in the room knows it, so the fight you'd win anyway never has to start." Hermione absorbed it the way she absorbed everything, and then she said the thing that proved again why he kept her. "But that only works if they believe winning is impossible. The second someone decides there might be a way to put you down for good, they'll try it. Publicly failing to kill you doesn't make them stop, Harry. It makes them more determined and more careful and willing to use bigger things." Her clever face was grim. "You haven't ended a war this morning, you've started a better funded one." "I know," Harry said quietly. "That's why I needed you to see it coming, because you're right, and I'm going to need someone thinking 3 moves ahead while I'm busy not dying." The ministry's observer arrived 4 days later, and she arrived the way the ministry did everything, with paperwork. Her name was Hestia Krail, and she was deputy something in the department of something, a tall woman with iron-gray hair and a face like a closed ledger, and she came with 2 silent orders and a writ signed by the minister himself, and she set up in a borrowed office and began with terrible bureaucratic patience to assess Harry Potter. Harry sat across the desk from her in the borrowed office with Dumbledore standing by the window, present and watchful and saying little, and he answered her questions in the flat, even voice he'd used on Snape, and he watched her write and he understood her completely within the first 10 minutes because he had met her kind in every century he could remember. She was not cruel. She was worse than cruel. She was a functionary, and to a functionary a thing that did not fit the categories was not a wonder or a horror but a problem, an irregularity in the ledger. And the function of a functionary was to resolve irregularities, and Harry could see her behind the closed ledger face, deciding what category he belonged in and what resolution that category would require. The reports describe, Madame Krail said, not looking up from her parchment, a fall of approximately 100 feet onto frozen ground resulting in multiple comminuted fractures followed by recovery, within seconds without intervention. She did look up then and her eyes were not unkind, which was the worst part. Can you account for this, Mr. Potter? No, Harry said, you cannot account for it. I can describe it, I can't account for it. There's a difference and you know it, or you wouldn't be writing everything down instead of asking the obvious next question. He held her eyes. The obvious next question is whether it can be stopped. That's what the writ is really about. You've been sent to find out if there's a thing that lives in this castle that the ministry can't control, and if there is, what's to be done about it. He let that sit. I'll save you the trouble of the careful version. Yes, there is. And nothing's to be done about it because the doing requires me to die, and I've tried that and it doesn't take. The quill stopped. By the window, Dumbledore's blue eyes had gone very sharp because Harry had just said aloud in front of the ministry the exact thing that Albus had spent 4 nights at his own window failing to find a way around, and Harry had said it not as a confession but as a threat, the way you tell a man the gun is loaded so he'll think twice about reaching for it. Madame Krail set down her quill very carefully. Mr. Potter, she said, you are 11 years old. I'm aware of how old this body is, Harry said. I'd ask you not to mistake it for how old I am. Whatever you write in that ledger, write this in it too because it'll save lives, possibly including some of yours. I have no quarrel with the ministry. I want to finish school. I want to be left alone. The day the ministry decides I'm a problem to be resolved is the day the ministry finds out what I already know, which is that I can't be resolved, and a great many people will get hurt finding it out, and none of them will be me. He stood because he had decided the interview was over, and the small fact of an 11-year-old deciding when a ministry interview was over was itself a kind of message. File me however you like. Just understand that the file doesn't change the territory. On the territory, you can map me, you can't move me. He walked out. Behind him, Hestia Krail sat for a long moment looking at the closed door, and then she picked her quill back up, and at the top of a fresh sheet of parchment she wrote in a careful ministry hand the heading that would set in motion everything that came after: subject, Potter H. classification anomalous. Containment assessment, pending, and underlined the word containment twice. And by the window, Albus Dumbledore watched her do it and said nothing, and thought, with the cold arithmetic that had replaced his twinkle since Halloween, that there were now 3 powers in Britain converging on a single boy. A dark lord who feared him, a ministry that meant to contain him, and an old headmaster who needed him to be able to die. And the boy was 11 and getting stronger and had just told all 3 of them to their faces that none of them could stop him. Albus had spent his life being the cleverest man in every room. He stood in the borrowed office and understood with something close to vertigo that he was no longer sure he was the cleverest man in this one, and that the other one was a child, and on for now the right side, and that the day that changed would be the worst day Britain had seen since the last war, and possibly the last day Britain saw it all. Lucius Malfoy came to the school in the spring, the way money comes anywhere, with a smile and a donation and a quiet word for the governors, and the quiet word was about Harry Potter. Harry knew it was about him because his nose told him so. The man carried the same cold, expensive smell as his son, and under it the particular sourness of a frightened, powerful man, and Lucius Malfoy was frightened of Harry in a way that Draco had only inherited the shape of. The father had been in the graveyard before there was a graveyard, had worn the mask in the First War, had felt the Dark Lord's terror through whatever bonds still bound the marked, and had come to Hogwarts to see for himself the thing that had made his master afraid. He arranged the meeting to look like an accident, a corridor, a courteous pause, and Harry let him, because a man who wants to take your measure is a man whose own measure you can take in return. Harry Potter, Lucius said, leaning on his cane, the silver snake's head of it catching the light. The stories hardly do you justice. A boy who falls 100 feet and stands, a boy who walks through curses. The gray eyes moved over him, assessing the way Krail's had, the way they all did. My son writes home about you. He is frightened of you. He pretends otherwise, but I know my son. A thin smile. I confess I came to see whether the fear was warranted. It is, Harry said. But not for the reason you've come to find out. He looked at the man, at the expensive fear under the expensive manners. You're here on behalf of something, not the governor's, the thing on the other end of the mark on your arm, the thing that's coming back, the thing that wants to know if the rumors about the Potter boy are true before it has to face them itself. You came to be its eyes. Harry watched the color go out of the man's face. So be its eyes. Look, go home and tell it what you saw. Tell it the rumors are true and worse than true. Tell it that the thing it's afraid of is 11 years old and getting older, and that every year it waits the thing gets stronger, and that there is no version of the future it's planning where I am not standing in the middle of it whole when the rest of you have stopped." He stepped closer, and Lucius Malfoy, who had faced down horrors and bought his way out of Azkaban, took a half step back without meaning to. "And tell it one thing more from me so it has time to think about it before it does anything we'll all regret. Tell it that I have no quarrel with frightened men who stay home. The mark on your arm doesn't make you my enemy. What you choose to do with it does. You've got a son, Mr. Malfoy, you've got a wife. When the war comes, and it's coming, you're going to have to decide whether they matter more than a dead man's cause. I'd choose them. I've buried enough families to know which one's worth keeping." It was not what Lucius Malfoy had come to hear, and it was not advice he could afford to take, not yet, not with the mark on his arm and the master returning. But it lodged. Harry saw it lodge, the small uncertainty in the gray eyes, the first hairline crack in a loyalty that fear had welded, and the warrior marked it, the way he marked everything. A frightened man with a family is a man who can at the right moment be turned, and wars are won at the margins, in the small defections of men who finally choose their children over their causes. Lucius left without his answer. He did not look back. But that summer, the Malfoy boys' letters home changed their tone, and that next year the father's donations to certain causes quietly stopped. And at the very end of the war, in a courtyard full of the dying, a marked man would lower his wand and gather his wife and his son and walk away from a battle he had finally decided was not worth their lives, and none of them would ever know that it had started with a corridor and a courteous pause. And a boy who had buried enough families to know which one was worth keeping. "You turned him," Hermione said after when Harry told her, "or you started to with a sentence in a hallway." "I planted a doubt," Harry corrected. "Doubts grow on their own if you plant them in the right soil. His soil's his son. Most men's soil is someone." He looked out the window at the spring grounds. "That's the part the wand wavers never learn, Hermione. They think wars are won with power. They're won with people, with knowing which thread to pull in which frightened man, so that when the day comes he pulls it himself and thinks it was his idea. I can't be killed. That wins me the fights. But the war, the whole war, gets won in corridors, one doubt at a time, in men who don't even know yet that they're going to change sides." He turned from the window. "Voldemort never understood that. He rules by fear, and fear makes obedient servants and terrible allies, because the moment you're not the scariest thing in the room anymore, fear runs the other way. And I'm about to spend the next several years being a great deal scarier than he is. His whole army's held together by terror. I'm going to give every frightened man in it a reason to be more afraid of dying for him than of leaving him. And then when it matters, his army's going to come apart in his hands, and he'll never understand why, because he'll be looking for the spell that did it, and it won't have been a spell at all." Dumbledore sent for him after Crail left, and Harry went, because a summons from the headmaster was data, and Harry never refused data. The office was full of whirring silver instruments and a sleeping portrait gallery, and a red-gold bird on a perch that watched Harry come in with eyes too old for an animal. And Harry watched it back, because his nose had caught the thing about the bird at once. It smelled of fire and time and a kind of dying that wasn't dying, and the warrior in him recognized a fellow traveler when it met one. "A phoenix," Dumbledore said, following his gaze, settling behind the desk with the careful slowness of a very old man. "Fox, they burn, you see, when their bodies fail and rise again from the ash. Reborn, it is a rare magic, Harry, perhaps the rarest, a creature that death cannot keep." The blue eyes came to rest on Harry, mild and terrible. "I find I have developed a sudden, profound interest in creatures death cannot keep." "I imagine you have," Harry said, and sat without being asked, the small assertion again, and met the old man's gaze. "You wanted to take my measure after Crail, so take it, but I'll save us both the long way round, because I respect your time and I'd like you to respect mine. You're not afraid I'm dangerous. You worked out I was dangerous months ago. You're afraid I'm dangerous in a way you can't use." He let that land. "You've got a plan, a long one. You've had it since before I came here, maybe since before I was born. And somewhere in that plan there's a place where I was supposed to do something, be something, give something, and you've just spent a year watching me turn into a thing that won't fit the slot you cut for me. That's what's behind the half-moon glasses, headmaster, not fear of the monster, grief for the plan." The office was very quiet. Even the silver instruments seemed to still. Dumbledore did not deny it. That was the thing Harry respected about him, in the end, the thing that kept the old man on the list of people Harry would not simply remove if it came to it. Dumbledore looked at a truth told to his face and did not insult them both by lying. "You are a remarkably perceptive young man," the headmaster said quietly. "I'm a remarkably old one," Harry said. "In here," he touched his temple. "I've met your kind in every century I can remember, headmaster. The ones who carry a whole war in their heads and move the rest of us around the board for reasons they won't say, because they've decided they're the only one who can see the whole picture, and maybe they're even right. I've been a piece on a board like that more times than I can count. I've been spent by men exactly like you, men who were kind to my face and grieved me sincerely and put me in the ground for the greater good anyway." He held the blue eyes, and his voice did not rise, and that was what made it land. "So here's the one thing I came up here to make sure you heard, because everything else we do for the next several years depends on you believing it. You don't get to spend me. Whatever's in your plan, whatever slot you cut, it required a Harry Potter who could be lost. There isn't one. There's never going to be one. And the sooner you grieve that and build a plan around a piece that can't be sacrificed, the more of the other pieces we both save. Because I will fight your war, headmaster. I'll fight it harder than anything else on the board. But I'll fight it as a person, not a piece, and the day you forget the difference is the day you lose me, not to death, you can't manage that, but to the much simpler thing of me walking off your board and leaving you to play it alone." For a long moment Albus Dumbledore looked at the boy across his desk, and the Phoenix watched them both, and something passed between the old man and the child that neither of them would have called trust exactly, but that was the thing trust is built on, the clean hard honesty of two people who have stopped pretending not to see each other. "You ask me to set down a plan I have carried for longer than you have been alive in this life," Dumbledore said at last, very low. "No," Harry said, standing. "I'm telling you it's already broken and asking you to be brave enough to notice. There's a difference. You're the cleverest man in Britain, headmaster, you'll get there. I'd just rather you got there before the war than after it, because after it is when the body counts come in, and I've seen too many of those to want to watch a good man add to one by holding on to a plan a year too long." He went to the door and paused, the way Hermione had paused in the train, and gave the old man one true thing because the old man had not lied to him, and that earned something. "For what it's worth, I don't think you're a bad man. I think you're a man who's been the only one carrying it for so long he's forgotten how to put it down. I know that weight, I've carried it across lifetimes. So when you're ready to share it instead of spend us, I'll be here. I'm always going to be here. That's the one thing about me you can actually plan around." And he left the headmaster alone with his Phoenix and his broken plan and his whirring silver instruments, and Albus Dumbledore sat for a long time in the dark, watching the firebird that death could not keep, and beginning slowly, painfully, a year and more before he would finally manage it, to do the hardest thing the boy had ever asked of anyone, to set the board down and trust the piece that could not be spent to be a person instead. Quirrell stopped waiting for accidents in June. Harry had known he would. A man with a thing on the back of his head whispering that it was afraid was a man on a clock, and Harry had spent the spring reading the clock. The way Quirrell's smell grew more rotten, the way his stutter slipped when he thought no one listened, the way his eyes went again and again to the third-floor corridor where the castle kept whatever it was keeping. Hermione had worked out the rest from the library, a thing called the Philosopher's Stone, a thing that made gold and made you live forever, a thing that had come to Hogwarts in the spring from a vault at Gringotts that someone had tried and failed to rob, a thing a wraith with no body of his own would want more than anything in the world. "He's going to go for it," Hermione said the last week of term in the room the castle gave them. "Soon. And the staff are leaving. Dumbledore's been called to London on ministry business. Did you see he left this morning?" "It's not ministry business," Harry said. "It's a lie. Quirrell planned to get him out of the castle. Same move as the troll, distract the strongest piece and act in the gap." He was already pulling on his coat. "He waited until Dumbledore was gone, which means he goes tonight. Then we tell McGonagall, and she tells us not to be silly, and by the time anyone believes us he has the stone and a body and a 30-year head start." Harry checked the corridor through the open door, the old habit, exits and angles. "No, I go down tonight, you stay, I'm coming." He looked at her. He thought about all the reasons to say no, and they were good reasons, and the best of them was that she could die and he couldn't. And the thing he had decided on Halloween he would never allow again was a club coming down on her in a flooded bathroom. But he had learned something across 100 lifetimes about telling brave people to stay home. They didn't, and they got hurt worse following you in secret than they did standing at your side. And he needed eyes that thought 3 moves ahead while he was busy not dying. "You stay behind me," Harry said. "When I tell you to run, and you don't argue and you don't look back. Those are the terms. Take them or I stun you and lock you in the dormitory, and I'll do it, Hermione, I will. Those are awful terms. They're the only ones on offer." She took them. Of course she took them. And the two of them went down through the sleeping castle toward the forbidden corridor, and the warrior walked point with his nose in the air and his hands loose at his sides, and the cleverest girl of her age walked behind him with her wand out and her mind running ahead into the dark. The corridor's defenses were meant to stop a thief, and Harry was not a thief. He was a weapon, and a weapon goes through what a thief goes around. The 3-headed dog he put to sleep with the harp Quirrell had already left charmed and playing. The man had been through ahead of them. The trail of his rotted smell led down into the dark, and Harry followed it past every obstacle the staff had laid. And where the obstacles were clever, Hermione solved them, the strangling plant and the logic of the potions. Her quick mind doing in minutes what the staff had imagined would take an enemy hours. They came at the last to a chamber under the castle, round and high and cold, and in the center of it stood a tall dark mirror, and in front of the mirror, turban gone, stood Quirinus Quirrell, and Harry stopped at the chamber's edge and put his arm out to hold Hermione behind him and looked at the man, and for the first time saw the thing on the back of his head. It was a face. A second face where the back of a skull should be, white as bone and flat as a snake's, with red eyes and slits for nostrils, and the rotted smell poured off it like cold off ice, and the scar on Harry's brow lit up so bright and so cold that for a moment he saw 2 of everything, and the face on the back of Quirrell's head smiled at him across the chamber with a mouth that had no business smiling. "Harry Potter," said Lord Voldemort in the high cold voice through the front man's mouth now, Quirrell turning so the wraith could look at him with both faces at once. "I wondered if you would come. I rather hoped you would. There is something I have wanted to do since Halloween, and it requires you to be present." "Get the mirror, Quirrell," Harry said, ignoring the wraith, speaking to the man because the man still had fear in him and fear could be worked. "You won't get what you want out of it. It shows you your heart's desire. You don't have a heart anymore. You gave it to the thing on your neck a long time ago. You'll stand in front of that glass for the rest of your life and it'll show you the stone you'll never reach. Clever boy, Voldemort hissed, but not why I kept you alive to walk down here, Quirinius. And Quirrell raised his wand and pointed it at Hermione. Harry moved before the man finished the motion, which was the whole point of 100 lifetimes of doing this, that he was already moving while other men were still deciding, and he got himself between the wand and the girl in the half-second it took the curse to leave it, and the curse hit him square in the chest. It was not the green light. The wraith was not ready yet to spend the green light, was saving it, Harry would understand later, for a purpose. It was a curse of cutting and burning, a thing meant to open a man from collarbone to hip, and it opened Harry exactly that way, a long deep wound that laid him bare to the bone and threw him back against the cold stone, and Hermione screamed and Voldemort laughed, the high cold laugh of a thing that has just watched its problems solved. And Harry got up. He got up with his chest hanging open and felt it close as he rose, the long wound zipping shut from both ends, the burnt flesh greening and pinking and sealing, the blood stopping like a shut tap, and he stood up out of a wound that would have killed any man in the chamber, and he looked at the wraith across the stone, and he let his hands open, and the claws came out. 6 blades of bone, wet with the blood of his own knuckles, gleaming in the cold light of the chamber, and the laugh died on Quirrell's mouth, and the red eyes on the back of his head went for the first time wide. Yes, Harry said softly, and his voice had changed, the boy's register gone out of it entirely, the warrior all the way up and looking out through the green eyes. That's the thing you've been afraid of since Halloween, that's the thing with no mechanism. You build your whole long death-cheating life on the law that death holds, and here I am, the law's exception, 11 years old and walking toward you, and you finally get to find out what I already know. He took a step. It doesn't hold, not for me, you can open me up, I close, you can throw me 100 feet, I get up, and the green light you're saving, go ahead, spend it. I'll be very interested to see what happens because I've taken it before in this very country when I was 1 year old and you saw what it did then. Kill him, Voldemort screamed, kill him, Quirinius, all of it, Quirrell threw everything he had. The chamber lit with it, curse after curse, cutting and burning and bone-breaking, and a dozen Harry had no names for, and Harry walked through them. That was the image that would go into the story, the one Hermione would carry the rest of her life, the one that the surviving paintings of that chamber would whisper about for a century. A small boy with bone claws walking through a storm of killing curses toward a screaming man, and every curse that landed simply not holding, the wounds opening and closing as fast as the wand could throw them. The boy never slowing, never flinching, walking through lethal magic the way a man walks through hard rain, head down, patient, certain, coming. He reached Quirrell. He did not use the claws on the man. He would think about that later, that even then, with his chest carved open 6 times over and the wraith shrieking for his death, he had pulled the blow because the man was a man and the thing in him was the thing that needed ending, and Harry had standards even now. He drove the claws into the floor on either side of Quirrell's feet, pinning his robes, and he took the man's wand hand in his own small grip and crushed it until the wand fell, and he put his face an inch from the screaming front face and the screaming back one, and he said into both of them the thing he had come down to the dark to say. You can't win this, Harry told Lord Voldemort, not because I'm stronger, because the game you're playing only works against things that die, I don't. Every plan you've ever made, every horcrux, every clever cheat, they all rest on death being a thing you can manage. And I'm proof it isn't. As long as I'm in the world, you're a man who built his house on a law I break just by breathing. He leaned closer. Run, get your body somewhere else. Come back stronger, come back with armies, come back with the green light loaded and ready. I'll be here. I can wait longer than you. I've already waited longer than your whole life. And every time you come, I'll still be standing and you'll be a little more afraid, until one day the fear is the only thing left of you, and then I won't even have to do anything. You'll just stop. The wraith looked at him out of the red eyes, and for one moment, one single moment, Lord Voldemort and the thing that had been Wolverine understood each other completely. 2 creatures who had each spent everything they had on the refusal to die, one by cheating death and one by simply outliving it, and the cheater looked at the exception and knew, with a certainty that would poison the rest of his long, unnatural life, that he had finally met the one thing his entire existence had no answer for. Then the wraith tore itself free of Quirrell. The man's body could not hold a thing that afraid and that desperate, and it came off him in a scream of black smoke and rot. And for an instant it passed through Harry, through the boy who could not die, and where it touched him his scar burned like a brand and his healing factor lit up white-hot fighting the wrongness of it. And the black smoke recoiled from him as if from fire, as if even a wraith could not abide a thing that death would not take. And it fled up out of the chamber and away into the night, leaving Quirrell dead on the cold floor and 2 children alone with a dark mirror. Harry drew the claws back, the skin sealed. He looked at his whole hands, then at his chest, where his torn robes hung open over unmarked skin, 6 closed wounds that had never been, and then he turned to Hermione, who stood against the wall with her wand still up and her face white and her eyes enormous, having watched a boy walk through killing magic and pin a dark lord to the floor with his own bones. You're all right, he said. It was not quite a question. She lowered the wand. She crossed the chamber on legs that didn't want to hold her, and she stopped in front of him, and she looked at the closed wounds and the whole hands and the 2 old eyes in the young face. And she did the thing she always did, which was refuse to look away, and then she did a thing she had never done, which was step in and put her arms around him hard, the way you hold a thing you were sure you'd lost, and Harry, who had buried everyone across more lifetimes than a heart could hold, would very still in the cold chamber and let himself for one moment be held. Don't ever do that again, Hermione said into his shoulder, fierce and shaking. Walk through curses. Don't ever. I know you can't die. I watched. I know, but I felt you die, Harry. Every time one of those hit you, I felt it, and you have to stop thinking that because it doesn't kill you, it doesn't cost anything. It costs me every time, so stop pretending you're the only one who pays. Harry was quiet for a moment. It was a thing no one had said to him in 100 years, that his not dying cost someone, that the people who loved an immortal thing died a little every time it walked through the fire it could survive, and he had spent so long being the one who couldn't be hurt that he had forgotten there were other ways to bleed. Okay, he said quietly and meant it, the first promise he'd made to another person in lifetimes. Okay, I'll stop pretending. The story got out the way stories do. By the time Dumbledore returned from his false errand in London, and he returned at a dead run the moment he realized he'd been moved off the board, his blue eyes wild with a fear Harry had never seen in him. It was already over, the wraith already fled, Quirrell already dead, and a boy already standing in the wreckage having walked through a Dark Lord's killing curses without a mark to show for it. And whatever Dumbledore had planned to say, whatever careful management he had prepared, died in his throat when he came into that chamber and found Harry Potter waiting for him, whole with eyes that had stopped pretending to be a child's. You knew, Harry said to him before the old man could speak. About the stone, about Quirrell, you set the corridor up like a test, a gauntlet a clever child could pass, and then you left the castle the night it mattered. I don't think you wanted me to die down here. I think you wanted to see what I'd do if I had to come down here. You wanted to measure me. He held the old man's eyes. Did you get your measurement? Dumbledore was silent for a long moment, and in that silence a great many careful lies arranged themselves and were, one by one, set aside because the old man understood that none of them would survive contact with the thing in front of him. Yes, Albus Dumbledore said at last, very quietly, and for once there was no twinkle and no performance, only an old man telling a terrible truth to a boy who would know if he didn't. I got my measurement, Harry, and I am afraid it is larger than anything I have a use for, and I do not yet know what that means for either of us. It means, Harry said, that you should stop planning around my death, because there isn't going to be one. Whatever you built that needs me to die at the end of it, and you built something, I can see it in your face. You've got the look of a man watching his own plan fall down. It's already broken, and the sooner you grieve it and build a new one, the more people we both save. He picked up his torn coat. I'm not your weapon, headmaster. I'm not anyone's. I'm the one thing in this whole war that nobody gets to spend. The sooner all three of you understand that, you, the Wraith, and that woman with her ledger, the sooner we can stop wasting lives finding it out. And he walked out of the chamber and up into the light, and Hermione went with him. And behind them the greatest wizard of the age stood alone in the dark beside a mirror that showed the heart's desire and looked into it. And Albus Dumbledore would never tell anyone what he saw there that night, except that it was not what it had used to be, and that he came out of the chamber a smaller and a colder and a more honest man than he had gone into it. The term ended. The school went home for the summer carrying the story with it, and the story grew the way stories grow, and by September the whole of magical Britain knew it in some shape or other. That the boy who lived had lived again and again and again, that there was a boy at Hogwarts who fell 100 feet and stood up, who took a Dark Lord's curses and walked through them, who could not, by any means anyone had tried, be put down. The unkillable boy. The name went around the country like a cold wind, and in a London office a woman named Hestia Crail added page after page to a file marked anomalous, and underlined the word containment until the parchment tore, and somewhere far away in a forest in Albania, a thing of black smoke and rot hid in the body of a snake and shook with a fear it had not felt since it was a boy in an orphanage, and made plans and waited. And in a castle in Scotland a boy who could not die slept the dreamless sleep of a warrior between battles and healed and grew and got ready for all of them. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, Lifetimes of War. The memories did not come all at once, and they did not come for free. Harry had thought that night in the troll's bathroom that the door blowing off its hinges meant he had it all, the whole of Logan, a century and more of war handed to him entire. He learned over the next 3 years that it did not work that way. What he had gotten that night was the shape of it, the certainty of who he was. The contents came in after, slowly, the way a flooded cellar drains, and every bucket of it carried something he had to live through again to keep. He learned languages this way. He would be sitting in History of Magic, the only class that bored even him, and a phrase would surface in his mind in Japanese, complete with the weight of the years he'd spent earning it, and behind the phrase, unbidden, the face of the woman who had taught it to him on a mountain in a country that no longer existed in the shape he'd known it, and the particular grief of having outlived her by longer than her whole nation had stood. He got the language. He also got the loss. They came bolted together, and the bolt could not be cut. He learned blade work the same way. The claws were his now on command, but the knowledge of how to use a blade, the timing, the distance, the cold economy of ending a fight in one motion that came back in fragments, each one attached to a war. He would remember a way to turn a man's wrist and disarm him, and with the memory would come the trench it had been learned in, the mud, the gas, the boy beside him who had not learned it and had died for the lack. He would remember how to move through a building full of enemies, room by room, and with it would come the building and the enemies and the reason he had been clearing it and whether he had been right to. It's not a gift, he told Hermione in their third year in the room the castle still gave them. He was older now, taller, the boy's softness gone out of his face and something harder set into it. And she was older too, the cleverness sharpened into something formidable, the two of them grown up alongside each other in the lamplight while the rest of the school grew up in the sun. Everyone thinks it must be a gift. 100 years of skill handed to kid, and it is. But every skill comes with the life I paid for it. I don't get the sword without the war. I don't get the language without the grave. He turned his hand over the knuckles that opened on command. I'm carrying other people's griefs, Hermione, people I loved when I was them. They're all in here and they all still hurt, and the body that won't let me die won't let me forget them either. That's the cost. That's the part the stories about reincarnation always leave out. They tell you you'd remember the wisdom. They don't tell you you'd remember every single time your heart broke, all of it, all at once, forever. Hermione had grown into the kind of person who did not flinch from this because she had spent 3 years not flinching, and she said the thing she always said, the thing that was the whole of why he kept her. Then tell me about them, the people you were, the ones you loved. If you have to carry them, you don't have to carry them alone. I've got room. I've been making room since the train. And so, on the long evenings of that third year, while a war assembled itself in the country around them, Harry Potter told the cleverest witch of her age about the lives of a man called Logan. The mountain and the woman who'd taught him Japanese, the trenches, the cold country where it had all begun, the white room where they'd poured metal into his bones, the loves and the burials, the long unbearable arithmetic of outliving everything, and she listened, and she held it, and the carrying got not lighter, but shared, which for a man who had been alone across lifetimes was the closest thing to lighter he had ever found. It was the warmest thing in his life those evenings. It was the only warm thing. And the warrior in him, who knew better than anyone alive what it cost to let someone close, let it happen anyway because he had learned the one lesson 100 deaths had to teach, that a life with no one in it was just a slower grave, and he had had enough graves. He trained all the while. Not the way the other students trained, they were learning to be wizards, and Harry let them think that was what he was doing too, turning in flawless work, never boasting, the dangerous, quiet boy at the back of every class. What he was actually doing was something the wizarding world had no curriculum for and would not have understood if it had. He was taking the warrior the claws had woken and teaching it to wear magic-like armor over its own older, harder bones. The wand became in his hands not a wand but a weapon platform. He learned the spells the way a soldier learns a rifle, not for elegance but for effect, the cutting curse, the blasting curse, the shield, the silent stunner, and then he did the thing no wizard thought to do, which was combine them with the body. A wizard fired a curse and waited to see if it landed. Harry fired a curse to make you flinch and was already inside your guard with the claws before the flinch finished, because 100 lifetimes had taught him that the wand was a way to make distance and the claws were a way to close it. And a man who could do both at once was a man who fought in a dimension his enemies didn't know existed. He was 13 and he could already, in the room the castle gave him, defeat the conjured simulacra of grown wizards 2 and 3 at a time. Not by outdueling them, which was the only kind of fight they understood, but by refusing to have the kind of fight they understood, by taking their best curses on a body that healed and walking through them to do the one thing no shield charm was designed to stop, which was a man with knives arriving at your throat. Hermione watched him do it evening after evening, and one night she said, "You're not training to win duels, you're training to make duels meaningless, to make the whole way they fight not matter." Yes, Harry said, that's exactly it. The first rule of any fight is to make it the kind of fight you win. They've built a whole society around the idea that power means how good you are with a wand. Fine, let them. I'll never be the best with a wand, but I don't have to be because I'm not playing the wand game. I'm playing the only game I've ever won, which is I'm still standing and you're not. Everything else is just how long it takes. And if someone changes the game on you, find something that does work. It was the question she always came back to, the one careful corner of her mind that refused to be comforted, and Harry respected it because she was right to ask it, because a man who believed he could not lose was a man already losing. Then I adapt, he said, or I lose. I've lost before, Hermione, lost everything more than once. The not dying isn't the same as not losing. I know the difference better than anyone alive. He drew the claws and looked at them in the lamplight. But it'll take more than a wand to change the game on me, and the only man in Britain clever enough to find what would he sheath the blades is too busy lying to himself about needing me to die to actually do it, so we've got time, not much, but some. The man clever enough was, that year, doing exactly what Harry said he was doing. Albus Dumbledore had spent 3 years since the chamber under the school trying and failing to build a new plan around a boy who would not die, and the failure had aged him in a way the long decades before it never had. The prophecy still required at its end a death freely walked into. The boy could not provide one. Every path Albus traced forward from that fact ran into the same wall. A final battle in which Voldemort, by whatever means, was diminished but not destroyed, because the one act that could destroy him, Harry's willing sacrifice, was no longer on the table, would never be on the table, could not be made to be on the table by any persuasion or manipulation Albus had ever commanded. He had begun that year to consider an option he was deeply ashamed of, and considered anyway because he was a man who had always been willing to do terrible arithmetic for the greater good. If the boy could not be made to die, could the boy be made to want to? Could a thing be done to him, taken from him, broken in him, that would make even an unkillable warrior choose to lie down? Albus thought about Harry's one friend, the Granger girl, the single warm point in the boy's cold orbit, and he thought about what the loss of her might do, and then he caught himself thinking it and was sick quietly in the privacy of his office at the man 3 years of fear had nearly made of him. He did not do it. To his credit, and it was the last of his credit, the bottom of a one-steep account, he looked at the plan and refused it, and chose instead the only honest path left to a man who had run out of clever ones. He would tell the boy the truth, all of it, the prophecy and the horcruxes and the sacrifice that could no longer happen, and he would let the boy who could not be spent decide for himself how to spend the rest of them. He would, after a lifetime of moving pieces, set down the board. He did not get the chance that year. Events moved faster than his courage. But the decision was made in the dark of his office, and it was the one decent thing left in a plan that had curdled, and it would matter at the very end more than anything else the old man ever did. The ministry, meanwhile, did what ministries do, which was form a committee. The file marked anomalous had grown over 3 years into a department. Hestia Krail had been promoted on the strength of it. There is no faster promotion in a bureaucracy than being the one who first named a threat. And she now chaired a body with a long, dull name that everyone who mattered called privately the Containment Committee, and the Containment Committee existed for one purpose, which it pursued with the patient lethality that only paperwork can sustain: to determine the means by which Harry Potter could, if it became necessary, be removed. They were not evil, the men and women of the committee. That was what made them dangerous. They were frightened and they were responsible, and they had been raised in a system that taught them the state must hold a monopoly on force. And here was a single child who held more force than the state could bring to bear, who had told a ministry official to her face that he could not be resolved, and to a certain kind of mind, the kind that rises in ministries, an unresolvable thing is not a wonder to be protected but a sovereign threat to be planned against. They told themselves they hoped never to use what they were building. They built it anyway. They were thorough. They studied him. They acquired, through means Harry would later make them deeply regret, samples, a hair, a vial of the blood he shed so freely and healed so completely, taken during a ministry-mandated medical assessment he had submitted to in his second year against Hermione's furious objection. They gave the samples to the Department of Mysteries, and the unspeakables, who feared nothing and respected less, set themselves to the most interesting problem they had been handed in a generation. How do you kill a thing that does not stay killed? They made progress. That was the part no one told Harry, the part that would nearly cost him everything in the years to come. They worked out slowly in their windowless rooms that the healing was not magic but something prior to magic, a property of the flesh itself, and that the way to stop a thing that healed was not to wound it faster than it could mend. They confirmed with cold satisfaction that this was impossible, but to take from it the thing it healed with, to find the engine of the factor and put it out. They did not yet know how. But they had stopped asking whether it could be done and started asking how, and that shift in a place like the Department of Mysteries was the beginning of the end of Harry Potter's certainty that nothing could touch him. He did not know it yet, but the cleverest girl of her age had warned him in the chamber under the school and 100 times since. If someone changes the game on you, find something that does work. And in a windowless room under London, someone was beginning, very slowly, to change the game. And then, in the spring of Harry's 3rd year, a man Harry had never met broke out of the inescapable prison of the wizarding world for the sole purpose of finding him, and the warmth in Harry's cold life nearly doubled, and the war came home. The man was Sirius Black. The story the ministry told was that he was a murderer, a servant of the Dark Lord, the man who had betrayed Harry's parents to their deaths and was now escaped and hunting the sun. The story the ministry told was wrong, and Harry knew it was wrong within 10 seconds of meeting the man, because Harry's nose did not lie, and a man who had spent 12 years in a place of pure despair for a crime he had committed smelled different from a man who had spent 12 years there for a crime he had not. And Sirius Black smelled of grief and rage and a love that had survived 12 years of Dementors, and none of it smelled like guilt. He came at Harry out of the dark of the shrieking shack, gaunt and wild and more dog than man after 12 years in Azkaban. And he came not to kill but to weep, to take the face of his dead best friend's son in his shaking hands and say the thing he had stayed alive 12 years to say. That he had not betrayed them, that the real traitor lived, that he was Harry's godfather and the closest thing to family the boy had left in the world. And Harry, who could read a man's truth in the chemistry of his fear, looked into the ruined face of his godfather and found, against every habit of 100 guarded lifetimes, that he believed him and more than believed him wanted him the way a man who has been alone across centuries wants, when it is finally offered, a person who knew the people he came from, who could tell him who his father had been, who had loved the same dead and could grieve them together. I knew your father, Sirius said, gripping him, weeping. I knew James, you've got his look, but you're not. There's something in you that isn't James, something older, I can see it. What are you, Harry? What did they do to you in that house? It's a long story, Harry said quietly, and for the second time in his life, and the second person, he decided to tell the truth, because this man had stayed alive 12 years in hell out of love for him and had earned it. And you're going to think I'm mad. But you're my godfather, and you broke out of Azkaban to find me, and you're the first family I've had since I can remember in any life. So you've earned the long story, Sirius. Sit down. Let me tell you what I am. And in the dark of the shrieking shack, with the traitor caught and the truth coming out and his godfather restored to him, Harry Potter let the second person pass the wall, and the warmth in his cold life doubled, and he did not yet know, none of them knew, that the warmer his life got, the more places the world would have to hurt, and that in a windowless room under London, men who feared him were learning, slowly, exactly where to press. Lupin taught him the Patronus that year, and it was the one piece of magic Harry ever learned that the warrior did not already half remember from some older life. The professor found him after the Dementors at the shack, found him in the room the castle gave him, and offered the lesson plainly. The Dementors were the one thing that had reached him, and there was a charm against them, and a man who could not be killed but could be drowned in his own memories ought, Lupin said quietly, to learn the only spell in the world built to hold those memories back. It works on a happy memory, Lupin explained, his tattered self gentle in the lamplight. The strongest, brightest one you have, you hold it in your mind and you let it fill you and you give it shape. He demonstrated, and the silver thing poured out of his wand and filled the room with warmth. The Dementors feed on despair, the Patronus is the opposite, joy made solid. The trouble most people have is finding a memory strong enough. Harry understood the trouble at once, and it was not the trouble Lupin imagined. His problem was not too few happy memories. It was too many, and all of them bolted to grief. 100 lifetimes of joy, every one of it followed by the loss of the thing that had made it, the woman in the fire, the men he'd fought beside, every love across every life, each bright memory a door that opened onto a grave. He reached for a happy memory, and the memory came with its ending attached, the way they all did, and the joy curdled before it could fill him. And the first dozen times he tried, the silver would not come at all, because a man cannot cast a charm of pure joy when every joy he owns is welded to a burial. It's not working, he told Lupin after the dozenth failure, and for once there was something almost like frustration in the flat veteran voice, because here at last was a wall the warrior could not simply walk through. The memories are too old, they've all got the loss baked into them. I reach for the warmth and I get the cold underneath it instead. Lupin was quiet for a long moment, and then he said the wise thing, the thing that made Harry understand why James Potter had loved this gentle, ruined man. Then don't reach for an old one, Harry, reach for a new one. The Patronus doesn't care how long you've held the memory, it cares how true it is. You spent 100 years collecting joys that turn to grief. But you've had this life 11 years, and somewhere in it there's a happiness that hasn't ended yet, one that's still happening, one with no grave on the other side of it. Find that, cast from that. And Harry stood in the room the castle gave him, and he thought, and he found it not an old joy, not a 100-year-old fire in a vanished house, but a new one, 11 years young and still going, a girl on a train choosing the seat across from him. A hand near his sleeve that had stayed near his sleeve through a troll in a graveyard in a chamber under the school. The one warmth in his cold life that had not yet, that might not ever, that he would spend everything to keep from turning into another grave. He held Hermione in his mind, the whole stubborn fact of her deciding to stay, and he let it fill him. And for the first time the warmth did not curdle, because this joy had no ending baked into it yet. This joy was still being written, and Harry Potter raised his wand and gave it shape. The Patronus that came out of him was not silver like the others. It came out bright and hard-edged and feral, a great lean four-legged thing with a low head and a heavy gait, a thing of the cold north countries, and it stood between Harry and the imagined dark with its hackles up and would not be moved, and Lupin stared at it, because he had taught the charm for 30 years and never seen one quite like it. A Wolverine, Lupin said softly. I didn't know they ranged this far, and then he stopped, looking at the boy and the beast, and something passed over his face, some half-understanding he could not complete, and he did not finish the sentence. No, Harry agreed, watching the silver beast hold the line, joy made solid in the shape of the oldest thing he was. You wouldn't have. He learned to cast it reliably after that, and it became, in the war to come, one of the few things that could reach the wounds his factor couldn't, a guard against despair in the shape of the thing he had always been, fueled by the one joy in 100 lifetimes that he was determined would not end in a grave. And every time he cast it, every time the silver Wolverine poured out of him and stood its ground, the memory at the heart of it was the same. A girl who had chosen to stay and a promise still being kept that some warmth could outlast even a thing that buried everyone. It was, Harry thought, the most honest piece of magic he had. Everything else he did was war. The Patronus was the other thing, the thing the war was supposedly for proof, made of silver and held against the dark, that a man who could not die had finally found something in this life worth not dying for. The letters from Sirius came all that year after the shack, smuggled by an owl that knew to fly only at night. And they were the second warm thing in Harry's life, and they cost him something every time, because each one was a man in hiding writing to a boy he could not come to, and the grief of that, a family within reach and still kept apart, was a grief Harry knew in his bones across 100 lives. But the letters were a gift too, and Harry took them the way he took every gift the world rarely gave him, with both hands and no apology. Sirius wrote about James. That was the thing Harry could get from no one else alive. Who his father had been, not the legend on the chocolate frog cards, but the actual man, reckless and loyal and quick to laugh. The boy who had become an animagus to keep a werewolf friend company through the change. The friend who had stood by Sirius when Sirius's own family disowned him. Harry read those letters in the room the castle gave him, and through them he met at one remove across a veil of death and ink, the father he had never been allowed to mourn, and it was a strange and aching gift, because the man in him had buried so many fathers and sons across so many lives that he had stopped, somewhere in the last century, expecting to be given a new one. You're lucky, he told Hermione, showing her one of the letters, the warmth in his voice the rare unbanked kind he only ever let out for her. I know that's a strange thing to say, a man on the run writing in code dodging dementors, but I've had so many lives where there was no one left who remembered the people I came from. Everyone who could have told me who my father was in every other life was already in the ground. And here's a man who knew mine, who loved him, who'll write me 1,000 words about the time James charmed a suit of armor to follow Snape down a corridor singing love songs. He folded the letter carefully. That's not nothing, Hermione. To a thing like me, that's not nothing at all. To know where I came from in this life from someone who was there, it's the rarest thing I own. Hermione read the letter and laughed at the armor and the love songs, and then she watched Harry put it away with the particular care he gave the few things he let himself love, and she said gently, he's going to want to see you, in person, as soon as it's safe, you know that. I know. And there it was under the warmth, the old cold knowledge. And it won't be safe, not for a long time and maybe not ever, because the Ministry wants him soulless and they've worked out that he's a lever against me. So I'll keep him at the end of an owl's flight where they can't reach him, and I'll hate every mile of the distance, and I'll keep him alive that way, because a father at the end of 1,000 letters is a father who isn't dead. He looked at the careful stack of them in his trunk. I've learned this across the lives. You don't get to keep the people you love the way you want to keep them. You keep them the way the world lets you, a letter, a distance, a night-flying owl. And you take that and you're grateful, because the alternative isn't keeping them closer. The alternative is a grave. He shut the trunk. I've got too many graves already. I'll take the letters. He wrote back that night a long letter about school and Hermione and the things he was careful not to say plainly in case the owl was caught. And at the end of it, after 100 lifetimes of burying fathers, he let himself write the one true sentence he had never once been able to write to anyone in any life: I'm glad you found me, and he sent it north into the dark, to a man hiding in a cave who would read it and weep, and the distance between them held mile after careful mile. The cruel necessary distance that was the only way a thing that could not die had ever been allowed to keep the people it loved. The traitor was a small gray man named Peter Pettigrew, who had hidden 12 years as a rat in a wizarding family's house. And when Harry's claws came out in the shrieking shack, the small gray man understood, in a way the Wraith and the Ministry had only theorized, exactly what he was looking at, because he had been a soldier in the First War and he knew the smell of a thing that could not be bargained with. You're going to tell the truth, Harry said to him, very quietly, the claws an inch from the man's face. In front of witnesses, under a quill that can't be cheated. You're going to give my godfather back the 12 years you stole, because you're a coward, Peter, and the one reliable thing about a coward is that he'll do anything to keep breathing, and right now your breathing is a thing I'm deciding about second by second. He let the man see the certainty in his eyes, the warrior who had ended 100 men like him in 100 wars. So, truth, and you live in a cell. Lies, and I find out, and there's no cell deep enough that I won't still be standing outside it the day you're due to come out. Choose. Pettigrew chose the way cowards choose, which was to say he confessed everything in a flood, weeping, groveling, and Sirius Black stood over him shaking with 12 years of rage and did not kill him, because Harry put a hand on his godfather's chest and said, not like this, not in the dark where no one sees, we do it so it counts. We do it so they have to give you your name back. And Sirius, who had stayed sane in Azkaban on the single thread of clearing that name, lowered his wand and wept and let the boy who could not die teach him the patience of a man who had all the time in the world. It nearly worked. It would have worked, except that the wizarding world's instruments of mercy were a horror, and the Dementors came. They came over the grounds in the dark as Harry marched the confessed traitor up toward the castle, and the truth, 100 of them. The prison's own guard sent to retrieve an escaped murderer and authorized, the warrant said, to administer the kiss on sight to suck out the soul of Sirius Black before he could speak a word in his own defense. Because someone in the Ministry, someone who had read the file marked anomalous, had understood that a freed Sirius Black would be a person Harry Potter loved. And a person Harry Potter loved was a lever. And a lever the Ministry did not yet control was a lever the Ministry would rather see destroyed. Harry felt them before he saw them, the cold rolling in ahead of them, the joy going out of the world, and he felt something else too, something the Dementors did to him that they did to no one else. Because a creature that fed on a person's worst memories had in Harry Potter a feast no other soul could offer. Not one life's grief but 100, every burial, every white room, every love outlived. The entire unbearable arithmetic of his existence laid open and pouring into the cold. He went down. It was the first time since the troll that the world had found a wound his body could not close, because the Dementors did not wound the body, they wounded the thing inside it, the thing a healing factor could not reach, and Harry Potter, the boy who could not die, fell to his knees on the dark grounds with 100 lifetimes of grief crashing through him all at once, and understood with the last clear part of his mind that he had found at last the one weapon that worked. Not death, despair. He could not be killed, but he could be drowned in his own memories by things that ate the soul, and the Ministry had just learned it, was watching from the castle windows and writing it down even now, and the part of Harry that was always the warrior, always the tactician, even falling, even drowning, wrote it in cold letters across his fading thoughts. They found one. There's a way. She was right. There's always a way. And then a great silver light tore the dark apart. And from up the slope, from a figure in tattered robes, Remus Lupin, the third marauder, the quiet professor who had been Harry's father's friend and had watched the boy all year with knowing eyes. And the silver thing he had conjured, vast and bright and shaped like nothing and everything, drove into the swarm of Dementors and scattered them like crows, and the cold broke and the joy came back into the world, and Harry knelt on the grass and breathed and felt the 100 griefs recede, not gone, never gone. But back behind their doors, Hermione reached him first, of course she did, dropping to her knees beside him with her wand still throwing its own smaller silver light, her face white, her hands on his shoulders. Harry, Harry, look at me, you're here, it's the memories, they're not happening, they already happened, you survived all of them, you're here. And she said it over and over, the only person alive who knew exactly which 100 deaths were drowning him and could name them back into the past where they belonged, and her voice was the thread he climbed up out of the cold, and when he came back to himself, the first thing he saw was her face. And the second thing he understood was that she had just saved a thing that could not be saved, had reached a wound a healing factor couldn't, with nothing but the stubborn fact of staying. There it is, Harry said hoarsely when he could speak. The thing you kept asking about, the thing that works. He got to his feet slower than he ever got to his feet and looked back at the scattering dark. They can't kill me, so they'll try to break me instead, drown me in the lives, and they just watched it work. He looked at the castle windows, at the faint pale faces watching from them, and his voice went cold and flat and very old. So now I know what they're going to reach for. Good. A thing you can see coming is a thing you can beat. But Sirius Black did not get his name back that night. In the chaos of the Dementors, the confessed traitor had done the one thing cowards are always good at, which was disappear, slipped his bonds in the cold and the silver light and the falling and gone, a rat into the dark grass, fled north and east toward the master he had betrayed his way back to, and by the time the grounds were quiet again, Peter Pettigrew was gone, and with him the only proof of Sirius Black's innocence, and the warrant for the kiss still hung over Harry's godfather's head. So Harry did the only thing left to do, which was send the man he had just gained back into hiding before the ministry could take him. And it was one of the hardest things he had done in any life, to look at the family he had been given back for a single night and tell him to run. They'll kiss you on sight, Harry said in the cold before dawn, with the great black dog that Sirius could become standing ready at the forest's edge. Pettigrew's gone and there's no proof, and they wanted you soulless tonight, which means someone in that building has decided you're a thing to be used against me and would rather destroy you than let me have you. I won't give them that, so you run, you stay alive, you stay free. He gripped his godfather's gaunt face the way the man had gripped his in the shack. I found you. After 100 years of burying everyone, I found one of my own, and I'm not putting you in the ground or in a cell or in the dark behind a Dementor's mouth. You hear me? You stay alive and you let me carry this, because I'm the one thing in this whole war that can't be taken, and the people I love are not going to be the price of that. Not you, not her, not anyone, go. And Sirius Black, weeping, pressed his forehead to his godson's for one moment, the boy who was somehow older than him, who spoke like a general and grieved like a man who'd buried nations. And then he was the great black dog, and then he was gone into the trees, and Harry stood at the edge of the forbidden forest in the gray before dawn and watched the second warm thing in his life run away into the dark to stay alive. And the cold settled back into him, the old cold, the veteran's cold. The cold of a man who has learned that the universe charges interest on every joy. Hermione found him there at first light, standing where the dog had vanished, and she did not say anything clever or comforting because there was nothing clever or comforting to say. She just came and stood beside him near his sleeve the way she had since the first night, and the two of them watched the sun come up over the forest, and after a while Harry said the truest thing he had said in 100 years. This is the part nobody warns you about, he said quietly. Not the dying, the loving. You'd think a thing that can't be killed would have nothing left to be afraid of. He watched the light come. But I found out a long time ago, the more I can't lose myself, the more it costs me to lose anyone else. Every person I let in is a wound the world gets to keep open because they can die and I can't, and I'll be standing there every single time, healing whole, watching them go. That's the real factor. Not the bones, the burying. I've buried everyone, Hermione, across all the lives, everyone, and the body just keeps standing me back up to do it again. Hermione was quiet for a long moment. Then she said with the fierce, clear stubbornness that was the whole of why he kept her, then we'll be the ones who don't make you bury us. Sirius is alive, I'm alive. And we're going to stay that way, not because the world's kind, it isn't, but because you've got two people now who are willing to be careful and clever and hard to kill on purpose to spare you that. You don't have to do the loving alone any more than the carrying. We chose this too, we chose you. She set her jaw against the dawn. So stop standing at the edge of the forest grieving us before we're gone. We're not gone, we're right here. And we plan to stay annoyingly, stubbornly here for a very long time. And Harry Potter, who had buried everyone across more lifetimes than a heart was built to hold, looked at the girl who refused to be buried and felt the iron in his chest crack the small, dangerous welcome amount it only ever cracked for her, and almost smiled, and this time let it all the way through. All right, he said. Stay then, both of you. We'll see if the world can be argued with. It couldn't, of course. The world was already moving. Far to the north and east, a small gray trader was crossing into a forest in Albania, carrying news to a thing of smoke and rot that had waited 3 years for exactly this. A servant returned, a body to be built. A war to be restarted now that the boy was older and the pieces were nearly in place. And under London, in a windowless room, the unspeakables had moved from theory to design and had begun with cold patience to build the thing that would take from a healing man the engine he healed with. The lifetimes of war had given Harry everything, the skill, the cunning, the cold, the certainty. They had not given him the one thing no warrior across any century had ever managed to keep, the people he loved safe forever. that the world would make him fight for, that even an immortal could lose. And the fight for it was about to begin in earnest, because the thing in the Albanian forest had just been handed the last piece it needed, and Lord Voldemort was coming back to the world with a single new article of faith burned into the center of his long, cold existence. That the boy could not be killed, and so the boy must be broken, and that the way to break a thing that cannot die is to take from it, one by one, every reason it has left to keep standing up. Harry felt none of this yet, standing in the dawn with the one warm thing left in his life beside him. But the warrior in him, the part that never fully slept, marked the quality of the quiet, the way it always did before a storm, and knew that the easy years were over, and that everything from here would be paid for in the only currency the world had ever charged him. He took Hermione's hand once, briefly, the first time he had ever reached for it instead of letting it reach for him, and then he let it go and squared his shoulders the way a man squares them before work, and the two of them walked back up toward the castle through the long gold light, into the last quiet morning either of them would have for a very long time. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. War can't kill him. Lord Voldemort came back to the world on a June night in a graveyard, and he did it with a plan that accounted, for the first time in his long existence, for a thing he could not kill. Harry was 14, and he had spent the year being maneuvered, and he had known he was being maneuvered, and he had let it happen for the same reason he let most things happen, because the maneuvering told him where the enemy was, and a hand reaching for you in the dark is a hand you can find. A tournament he had not entered had entered him anyway, his name coming out of a goblet by a hand he could not yet name, and Harry had walked the year's deadly tasks the way he walked everything, reading the trap, surviving it, drawing closer with each one to the center of the web. He had let himself be led because the warrior knew that sometimes you walk into the ambush on purpose, so that you are awake and ready inside it instead of caught flat-footed outside. So when the last task's trophy turned out to be a thing that grabbed him by the navel and tore him across the country to a graveyard in the dark, Harry Potter arrived already knowing he had arrived somewhere he was meant to die, and already deciding what he would do about it. The graveyard was old and overgrown, and the small gray traitor was there, Pettigrew sniveling and shaking, carrying a bundle that was not a baby though it was the size of one. And Harry's nose found the wraith inside the bundle from 30 feet, the rot and the cold and the wrongness, and his scar lit its old bright needle, and he understood that he had been brought here to be the final ingredient in a resurrection. The blood of the enemy the rite required, his blood. Taken by force in the dark to build the Dark Lord a body at last. They had bound him to a headstone before the Portkeys' disorientation cleared, ropes conjured tight, his arms pinned. The warrior's reflexes a half-second behind the unfamiliar wrench of the travel, and Pettigrew came at him with a silver knife, and Harry let him. That was the thing none of them ever understood, and the thing that made him what he was. He let the traitor cut his arm and take the blood, because his blood was a thing he had in endless supply, a thing the body made and remade without cost, and a few ounces of it into the Dark Lord's cauldron changed nothing about the fight to come except that it brought the wraith out of the bundle and into a body. And a body was a thing Harry could reach, and a wraith was not. He had spent the whole year hunting the enemy through the dark. He was not going to weep now that the enemy had finally agreed to have a body he could put his claws into. So he gave them the blood, and the cauldron boiled. And a tall, thin, terrible figure rose out of it, pale as bone, with red eyes and slits for nostrils, and a face Harry had last seen on the back of a stuttering man's skull. And Lord Voldemort stood in the graveyard in a body of his own for the first time in 13 years, and breathed and flexed his long white hands, and turned his red eyes on the boy bound to the headstone, and smiled. "Harry Potter," he said in the high cold voice that now came from a throat of his own, "welcome to my rebirth. You provided the blood, how fitting, the thing I cannot kill, helping to make the body in which I will spend eternity trying." He came closer, unhurried, savoring it. "You think I do not know what you are. I have had 3 years to think of nothing else. I know you cannot die. I know your wounds close. I know your bones come out of your hands. I have built tonight around all of it." He gestured, and his Death Eaters came out of the dark between the graves, a circle of masked figures apparating in 1 by 1, 20, 30, a ring of wands around a single bound boy. "I cannot kill you, so I will do the next thing. I will hurt you in front of an audience of everyone who fears you, and I will let them all see that the unkillable boy can be made to scream, and I will take from the world its certainty that you cannot be touched, because a thing that cannot be killed but can be tortured is a thing men will still in the end hope to break." "That's a good plan," Harry said. The graveyard went quiet. It was not the answer the Dark Lord had been performing toward. "It's a genuinely good plan," Harry said again, evenly from the headstone, his arms bound, his voice flat and unbothered as a man discussing weather. "Better than the troll, better than the broom. You finally understood you can't win the killing game, so you changed the game to breaking, and you brought witnesses because breaking only works if it's seen. That's real strategy, Tom. I'm almost impressed." He held the red eyes. "There's just one flaw in it, and you'd have caught it yourself 30 years ago. Before you cut your soul into so many pieces, there wasn't enough of you left to think straight. Do you want to hear the flaw, or do you want to keep monologuing? Because the monologuing is the flaw, actually, but there's a second one underneath it." A ripple went through the masked circle. No one spoke to the Dark Lord this way. No one had spoken to the Dark Lord this way in 30 years and kept a tongue to do it with. "You will be silent," Voldemort hissed. Or the flaw, Harry went on, because the warrior had spent the whole exchange doing what the warrior always did, which was work. The conjured ropes already loosening under the steady, invisible, patient pressure of muscles that did not tire and a skin that did not chafe and a body that had been getting free of bindings in 100 wars across 100 years, is that you built your whole plan around making me scream where people could see it. But the people who fear me aren't here, Tom. Your Death Eaters fear me, sure, but the country, the ministry, they're not in this graveyard, so whatever you do to me tonight, the only witnesses are men already on your side. You're not breaking my legend in front of the people who believe it. You're just confirming it in front of the people who already feared it. You did all this, a small nod at the cauldron, the circle, the elaborate murderous theater of it, and you forgot to invite the audience the plan needs. Which means tonight isn't the masterstroke, tonight's just a fight, and I'm very, very good at fights. The last rope fell away from his wrists. Harry had spent the whole speech not to taunt the Dark Lord, though he had enjoyed that, but to fill the seconds his hands needed, and now his hands were free and the warrior stopped talking, because the part of a fight where you talk and the part where you win do not overlap. And Harry Potter came off the headstone into the ring of 30 wands like a thing the graveyard had loosed. Kill him, Voldemort screamed, forgetting in the sudden animal fear of seeing the bound boy come free, his own elaborate plan, reverting under pressure to the only instinct 30 years had left him, the killing curse, all of you now. And 30 Death Eaters raised their wands at a single 14-year-old boy, and the graveyard lit green. The green light was the one thing in the universe meant to be final. It had no counter, it had no block. It had never failed, not once, in all the years anyone could name except a single time in a cottage in Godric's Hollow, against a 1-year-old whom the books had no mechanism for. And now 30 bolts of it converged on that same child grown to 14 from every direction at once, a closing sphere of death with no gap in it and no escape from it, and every masked figure in that circle watched the green light reach Harry Potter and felt the grim certainty of men who have just ended a thing at last. The green light hit him, all of it. There was no dodging 30 curses from every angle, and Harry did not try. He took it. The way he had taken the Trolls Club in the 100-foot fall in Quirrell's Storm, because the only way through some things is through, and the green fire of 30 killing curses poured into the boy in the center of the circle, and the graveyard went white, green, and blinding, and then dark. And in the dark, on the ground, Harry Potter lay still. For one moment, one long moment that the survivors would describe for the rest of their lives, he did not move, and the graveyard held its breath, and even Voldemort went silent, staring, because for one moment it had worked. The thing that could not be done had been done. 30 curses where one had failed, and the boy lay dead on the cold ground among the graves. The dying, Harry had told Hermione once, is nothing. The dying is a door. It is the coming back that is cold. He came back the way he always came back, all at once, into a body built to keep him. And with the coming back came the price the Dementors had taught him to dread, not one death but the memory of all of them, every burial, every white room, the whole unbearable arithmetic crashing through him at once. Because the green light did not merely stop the heart, it reached for the soul, and a soul like Harry's, a soul stretched across 100 lives. Gave the curse 100 deaths to drag him through on the way back up. He felt everyone. He lay on the cold ground of the graveyard and died his 100 deaths again in the space of a single second, and it was the worst thing that had ever happened to him in any life, worse than the White Room, worse than the Dementors. The entire weight of his existence poured into him at once through a curse designed to make death final, and the body stood him back up, whether he wanted it to or not. The way it always had, the way it always would. Harry Potter rose from the dead in a graveyard in front of 30 Death Eaters and the Dark Lord himself, and he came up slow, and he came up shaking, because even he had limits and he had just found one and walked through it. And when he was on his feet, he lifted his head and looked at Lord Voldemort across the cold ground. And his eyes were not a boy's eyes, and they were not even anymore quite a man's. They were the eyes of a thing that had just been to the bottom of itself and climbed back out. And he opened his hands, and the claws came. That's twice, Harry said, and his voice was wrecked and quiet and carried to every corner of the silent graveyard. Twice now you've put the green light in me, Tom, once when I was one and once just now, and both times the universe handed it back to you with the same answer, the answer you've spent 30 years refusing to hear because your whole existence depends on it being false. He took a step, and the nearest Death Eaters took a step back. Death doesn't hold for me, not your version, not anyone's. You are the man who broke his soul into 7 pieces so that death could never take him, and you are standing in front of the one creature in the world that does, effortlessly with its flesh, the thing you mutilated yourself to fake. I'm what you tried to become, and I'm 14, and I'm on the other side. You cannot, Voldemort's voice cracked, the cold control gone, naked horror under it. A man watching the one law his life was built on break in front of him for the second time. You will stop, you will lie down, I am Lord Voldemort, I have conquered death. No, Harry said. You hid from it, there's a difference, and you spent so long lying to yourself about it that you've forgotten there was ever a truth underneath. I didn't conquer death, Tom, I just stopped being something it could keep. You should have learned the difference tonight. You're not going to. So we're going to do this again and again every time you come, and every single time you'll throw the green light, and every single time I'll get back up, and the only thing that changes is that you'll get more afraid and I'll get more sure, until one day there's nothing left of you but the fear, and I won't even need the claws. And then Harry Potter went to work in the graveyard. The first open attack of the war came in Diagon Alley in the autumn, and Harry ended it in 90 seconds in front of 100 witnesses, and the 90 seconds did more to shape the war than any battle that came after. A dozen Death Eaters came down the alley in the masks, the way they had in the First War, to remind the country what fear felt like: a raid, a few deaths, a message written in green light and panic. It was the oldest move in Voldemort's book, and it had worked for 30 years, because the ordinary people of magical Britain had no answer to a dozen killers in masks, but to run and hope to be among the ones who lived. Harry was in the alley when they came, buying nothing in particular, and he heard the first scream and was moving before the second, and what the 100 witnesses saw, what they told and retold, until it became the thing the whole country believed about the autumn of that year, was a 16-year-old boy walk into a dozen killing curses and not fall. He did not bring the berserker. He had sworn that after London, and he kept it. What he brought instead was the careful warrior, the one who took wands and not throats, and he went down the alley through the green light the way he went through everything, and he disarmed them, one by one, methodically, taking the hands off the wands without taking the lives, and the killers who had come to write a message in fear found themselves instead the message. A dozen of the Dark Lords chosen, disarmed and broken and screaming in the middle of the alley they'd come to terrorize. By a single boy who walked through everything they had and chose, visibly, deliberately, in front of everyone, to let them live. It was over in 90 seconds. The Aurors arrived to find the work done and the witnesses already telling the story, and the story spread that day faster than any newspaper, because it was the one story the ordinary people of magical Britain had been starving for through 30 years of 2 wars. That the thing in the masks could be beaten, that the green light was not the last word, that there was at last something in the world that the Dark Lord's terror did not work on. The Ministry hated it, of course. A boy doing in 90 seconds what their Aurors could not do at all was a boy who made the Ministry look like exactly what it was, and the Containment Committee added the incident to the file marked anomalous with a note about the dangers of public vigilantism, and a recommendation that Mr. Potter be encouraged to leave law enforcement to the proper authorities. But the ordinary people did not care what the Ministry hated. The ordinary people had watched a boy walk through death to spare the lives of men who'd come to take theirs, and they had drawn the conclusion the Ministry most feared, which was the true one, that whatever the unkillable boy was, he was on their side, and that this was the first time in 30 years that being on a side had felt like it might be enough. "You've become a symbol," Hermione said, reading the third breathless account in as many days. "Whether you wanted to or not. To them, you're not the threat the prophet keeps calling you. You're the thing that finally can't be killed, pointed the right way. Do you understand what that does? People have been afraid for 30 years, and now there's a thing in the world that the green light doesn't work on, and it's protecting them, and they're going to follow that, Harry. They're going to believe in it. You're going to have to decide what to do with a country that started to believe in you." "I know," Harry said, and there was no pleasure in it, only the old weariness of a man who had been a symbol before in other lives and knew the cost of it. "It's a weapon and it's a trap both. A country that believes in you is a country you can move, and a country you can move is a country you can ruin if you start believing your own legend." He set down the paper. "That's the thing I have to watch now more than the curses or the cages, not what they can do to me. What I might let myself become, with a whole frightened country deciding I'm the answer to everything." He looked at her, the one person who would tell him the truth when the country wouldn't. "Promise me something when this is over. If I start acting like the thing they're going to want me to be, the savior, the king, the unkillable man who knows best, you tell me. You're the only one who'll be able to. Everyone else is going to be too busy being saved." He held her eyes. "The Ministry's afraid I'll become a monster. They're watching the wrong thing. The real danger isn't the berserker. The real danger is that a man who can't die and can't lose starts to think he can't be wrong. Don't let me. That's the one job I can't do myself." "I won't let you," Hermione said, and meant it, the way she meant everything, and it was the truest promise either of them made in the whole of the war, not a vow to keep him alive, which was unnecessary, but a vow to keep him honest, which was the only thing that ever could have saved him. Dumbledore told him the truth in the spring, and it cost the old man everything to do it, which was, in the end, the measure of what it was worth. He called Harry to the office at night, and there was no twinkle and no lemon drops and no performance, only an old man who had run out of clever plans and decided at last to do the one decent thing left to him. He told Harry about the prophecy, the words spoken before Harry was born, the line that had marked him, "Neither can live while the other survives," and he told him what the prophecy had meant in the plan Albus had built his life around, that at the end Harry would have to die, walk willingly into death to strip the Dark Lord of the protection he had stolen. "And I cannot ask it of you," Dumbledore said, and his voice was not the headmaster's voice, it was just an old man's, tired and ashamed. "Because you cannot do it. The one act my entire design required, your willing death, is the one act the universe will not permit you. I built a plan that needed you to be killable, Harry. I arranged your whole childhood toward making you a boy who would, when the time came, lie down and die for the greater good. And you are the one creature in the world who cannot. My plan has been broken since you were 11 years old, and I have spent 5 years failing to build another, and I have done things in my own head, considering how to make you die, that I will be ashamed of until I am in the ground." He looked at Harry, and there were tears in the old blue eyes. "So I am setting it down, the whole board. I am telling you the truth, all of it, and I am giving the war to the one person who is always going to have to win it, and I am asking your forgiveness, which I have not earned, for the years I spent planning to spend you." Harry was quiet for a long moment. He had known most of it, had read the old man's calculation since the chamber under the school, had smelled the concealment under the benevolence for years. But to hear it said plainly was its own thing, and the man in him who had been spent by generals across 100 lives, who had been the weapon other men planned around in war after war, felt something old and hard settle in his chest. "Tell me about the Horcruxes," Harry said. "That's the part that matters now. You've worked out how he's surviving. Tell me and stop apologizing, because the apology doesn't win the war and the Horcruxes might." And Dumbledore, with something like relief, the relief of a man finally allowed to be useful instead of clever, told him everything. The soul cut into pieces, the objects hidden across the country, each one an anchor death could not pull up while it stood, the locket, the cup, the diadem, the snake. And the last one, the one the old man's voice broke over, the fragment lodged in Harry himself the night the curse first failed, the piece of Voldemort's soul living behind the boy's scar. "That is why my plan required your death," Dumbledore said quietly. "The piece in you must be destroyed for him to be mortal, and I believed only your death could destroy it. But you cannot die. So I do not know, Harry, I confess I do not know how the piece in you is to be unmade, when the thing that carries it cannot be killed." Harry sat with it, the warrior turning it over the way he turned everything over, looking for the angle, and after a while the cold certainty came into his face that Dumbledore had learned to both trust and fear. "It's simple," Harry said. "It's been simple the whole time, and you couldn't see it because you were looking at it as a man who dies. The piece in me is destroyed when I die. Fine, I die all the time. The problem was never killing the piece, it's that killing it meant killing me, and I wouldn't stay dead to keep it dead. But that's backwards." He leaned forward. "I don't have to stay dead, I just have to die once with the piece in me while the factor's down and then come back. The death kills the fragment because the fragment can't survive what kills its host. And the factor brings me back because the factor only ever restores what's mine, and that piece of his soul was never mine. I die, the parasite dies with me, and I get up and it doesn't. The one thing he needs to make himself safe, my death, is the exact thing that burns his last anchor out of me, and I'm the only person alive who can die that death and walk away from it." He sat back. "He's going to spend the whole war trying to find a way to make death hold me. And the day he succeeds, even for a second, he's going to kill the last piece of his own soul that he hid in the one place he was sure I'd never let it be destroyed. He hid it in the thing that can't die. He thought that made it safe forever. It makes it the easiest one of all." Dumbledore stared at him, and slowly, the old man began to understand that the broken plan was not broken at all. That it had simply been waiting for the one mind that could see it from the other side, from the side of a thing that used death as a door. And Albus Dumbledore put his face in his hands. And what he felt was not grief and not shame, but the vast unlooked-for relief of a man who has carried a hopeless thing for 50 years and just been told by a boy that it was never hopeless. "Only upside down. Then we have until he learns how to make death hold you," Dumbledore said when he could speak, "to find and destroy the other 6, so that when that day comes and the last piece dies in you, there's nothing left for him to fall back on." "Yes," Harry said, "and I'm the one who goes after them all 6, because every one of them is hidden somewhere that would kill an ordinary man to reach, and I'm not one. Cursed caves, guarded vaults, whatever he's built around them. You point me at them, headmaster, I'll walk into the deaths. It's the one errand in this whole war I'm perfectly built to run." He stood. "Set the board down if you want, but hand me the pieces first. We've got a winter's work to do, and at the end of it, the most careful immortal in the world is going to discover he made himself mortal and never noticed, because he hid his life in the dark and forgot that the dark is where I do my best work. He did not kill them all. He wanted that understood afterward by the people who would tell the story and the people who would build policy out of it. He did not kill them all, and he could have. A 14-year-old with bone claws and a body that healed loose inside a ring of 30 wands in the dark. There was no version of that fight the Death Eaters won, and Harry knew at the moment his feet left the headstone, and so he fought it not to survive, which was never in question, but to send a message that would outlast the night. He took the wands. That was the thing he did, moving through the circle like weather, like a cold front, the claws flashing in the greenlit dark. He did not open throats, he opened hands, driving the bone through wrist and forearm so the wands fell, crippling the grip without ending the life, leaving 30 of the Dark Lord's most devoted servants disarmed and screaming and very much alive on the ground among the graves. He moved faster than wands could track. Inside the half-second, every one of them needed to aim, and he had spent 3 years training for exactly this. The fight where the enemy's whole method, point, speak, wait, was a rhythm he lived inside the gaps of, and the masked figures who had come to watch a boy tortured found themselves instead being dismantled methodically, mercifully, by a thing that walked through their killing curses to take their hands off their wands. A curse landed on him, and another, and another. They were not helpless. They were the elite of a dark army, and they fought hard once the fear set in, and Harry let the ones land that he could not avoid and walked through them the way he always did, the cutting curses opening him and closing, the blasting curses throwing him in the body getting up, and every wound that failed to hold him was its own argument, its own line in the message. Until the Death Eaters were not fighting a boy anymore in their own minds, but a force of nature wearing a boy's shape, a thing the green light had refused twice, and that came on regardless, patient, and unkillable and merciful in a way that was somehow more terrible than cruelty would have been, because he spared them. That was the message. I could end every one of you and I am choosing not to, the sparing said, and the choosing is mine and the not dying is mine, and there is nothing you or your master can do to take either away from me. So go home and tell him what you saw, tell him the unkillable boy let you live, tell him it was a decision and not a mercy he earned. A man they killed would have been a martyr. A man who walked through their worst and chose to leave them breathing was a thing they could not file under any comfortable heading, and Harry knew it, and that was why he did it. The cold tactical generosity of a warrior who understood that the deepest wound you can give an enemy is to make your restraint a thing he has to live with. Lord Voldemort tried to kill him the whole time. The Dark Lord stood at the center of his collapsing circle and threw the green light again and again, screaming it now, all his cold control gone. The most powerful dark wizard of the age reduced to man, flinging the one curse he trusted at a target that would not stay down. And each bolt found Harry and each bolt failed, and with each failure something in Voldemort came further apart, because every wizard's power rests on a foundation of belief that the rules hold, that the green light is final. That death is a door you can lock, and Harry Potter was kicking the foundation out from under the Dark Lord one failed curse at a time, in front of the man's own followers, in the dark of the graveyard where he had been reborn. At the end of it, Voldemort stood alone among his disarmed and screaming servants, and Harry walked toward him through the wreckage, claws out, bleeding from a dozen closing wounds, and the Dark Lord, the conqueror of death, the terror of 2 generations, did the thing that no story would ever quite be able to capture, the thing that ended the night and began everything after it. He ran, he disapparated. He fled his own rebirth, abandoned his own followers on the ground, tore himself out of the graveyard and away into the dark because the alternative was to stand and learn, claw by claw, the full meaning of a thing that could not die, and even Lord Voldemort, who had cut his soul to pieces rather than face the end, could not face the boy who simply did not have one. The crack of his departure was the loudest sound in the sudden quiet, and then he was gone, and Harry Potter stood alone in a graveyard full of his enemy's broken army, whole, dripping, 14 years old, the victor of a battle the other side had designed to be his execution. He did not chase. He had no way to follow an apparition, and the warrior knew better than to burn himself chasing a beaten enemy into ground of the enemy's choosing. He stood instead among the groaning Death Eaters and got his breathing back and let his wounds finish closing, and let the 100 deaths the green light had dragged him through settle back behind their doors. And then he found the body of the boy who had been brought to the graveyard with him, Cedric, a real boy, a good one, killed in the first careless second by a flick of Pettigrew's wand. Kill the spare, a death Harry had not been fast enough to stop because he had still been disoriented from the portkey. And Harry knelt by the dead boy in the dark for a long moment, and the grief that found him there was not 100 lifetimes worth. It was just one boy's, one stupid waste of one good life, and somehow that was worse, because that one he might have prevented, and the body that had saved him 100 times had been a half-second too slow to save the spare. "I'm sorry," Harry said to the dead boy quietly in the cold. "You weren't supposed to be here. None of this was yours." He gathered the body up because he was not leaving it in the enemy's graveyard, because some things a man carries home no matter what they cost. "I'll take you back. I'll tell them what you were. That's the one thing I can still do." And he found the portkey and took the dead boy's hand in his and let the trophy tear them both back across the country to the bright lit world that had no idea yet what had happened in the dark. He came back to a stadium full of cheering people that fell silent the moment they saw what he carried, and from that silence the whole rest of the war unrolled. Voldemort was back. Harry said it plainly to the assembled crowd, to the white-faced officials, to the ministry men who came running. The Dark Lord had returned, had a body, had a graveyard full of disarmed Death Eaters who could be rounded up that very night if anyone moved fast enough, and the war was here whether the country wished to believe it or not. He said it the way the warrior said everything, flatly, completely, leaving no room for the comfortable lie. And the Ministry of Magic, faced with a truth too terrible to hold, did what frightened institutions do, which was reach instead for the truth they could manage. They could not manage Voldemort. They had no plan for Voldemort. But they had a file marked anomalous and a committee and 3 years of careful work on a different problem entirely. And to a certain kind of official, the return of the Dark Lord and the existence of the unkillable boy were not 2 crises but one, because what frightened them in the end was not evil. It was power they did not control. And of the 2 powers loose in Britain that night, only one of them was standing in front of them, 14 years old, covered in blood, having just demonstrated to a stadium full of witnesses that he could walk through the killing curse. Cornelius Fudge looked at the boy who had survived 30 killing curses and carried a dead child home, and what the Minister for Magic felt was not gratitude and not wonder. It was the specific cold terror of a small man standing next to something enormous, and small men given power do a predictable thing with that terror. The Daily Prophet the next morning did not run the headline Voldemort returns. It ran the headline Potter, the unkillable threat in our midst. And the article beneath it, sourced to senior ministry officials, asked the question the Containment Committee had been building toward for 3 years. If there is a single individual in Britain whom no law can constrain, no court can hold, and no force can stop, is that individual not, whatever his intentions, the gravest threat to the rule of law the magical world has ever faced? And ought not the ministry, in its solemn duty to the public, to take whatever steps are necessary to ensure that such power can, if it ever turns against us, be contained? Hermione read it aloud to him in the hospital wing where Madame Pomfrey was fussing over a boy without a single wound to treat, and her hands shook with fury as she read, and at the end she crushed the paper into a ball and said, "They're going to come for you. They're frightened of Voldemort and they can't reach him, so they're going to spend all their fear on you instead because you're the one they think they can do something about. This isn't journalism, Harry, this is a ministry laying the groundwork. They're preparing the country to accept it when they move against you. They're making you the monster so that whatever they build to put you down looks like protection." "I know," Harry said. He was looking at the ceiling, calm, the calm that frightened her more than rage would have. "They've been building it for 3 years. The Dementors at the shack told them where to press. The Department of Mysteries has my blood. They've stopped asking whether they can stop me and started working out how. And now Voldemort's given them the excuse, a national emergency, a panicked public, a reason to declare me a danger to the realm." He turned his head and looked at her. "Two enemies now, Hermione. The Dark Lord who wants to break me because he can't kill me, and the Ministry that wants to contain me because they can't control me. Different goals, same problem, same target. And here's the thing, neither of them has worked out yet. The thing I'm going to make them both learn the hard way." He sat up, and the two old eyes in the young face were very steady and very cold and very sure. "They're going to push me into being exactly what they're afraid of. The Ministry is going to come at me to prove I can be controlled. And they're going to fail publicly over and over the way everyone fails, and every failure is going to make them more desperate and more extreme until they reach for something that actually hurts the people I love trying to get to me. And Voldemort's going to keep throwing the green light and watching it fail until he stops trying to kill me and starts trying to break me through them, through you, through Sirius, through anyone I let close. Both of them, driven by fear, are going to spend this whole war reaching for the one weapon that works on me, which isn't death, it's loss. And the day one of them actually takes someone," his voice did not rise, and that was the terrible part, it went quieter, flatter, older, "is the day they find out what the thing they've spent all this fear creating actually looks like with the leash off. Because I've held the leash my whole life, Hermione, across every life. I've been the warrior who pulls his blows, who takes the wands instead of the throats, who walks through the curse and lets the cursor live. I've held it because I decided a long time ago that a thing that can't be stopped has to stop itself, or it isn't a man anymore, it's just a weapon." He looked at his hands, the knuckles that opened on command. "They're all working so hard to make me into a weapon, Voldemort and the Ministry both. And the one thing keeping me from being one is a choice I make every single day to be more than the thing they're afraid of. I'm going to keep making it as long as I can." He met her eyes. "But they should pray, all of them, Fudge and Crail and Tom and every frightened man with a wand and a warrant, they should pray they never give me a reason to stop." The hospital wing was very quiet. Outside, the country was waking up to a newspaper that called a 14-year-old boy the gravest threat the magical world had ever known. And in a windowless room under London, the Containment Committee convened an emergency session. And in a stolen manner, a Dark Lord licked the wound of his second failure and began, at last, to plan around breaking instead of killing. And in a high office, an old man read the same newspaper and understood that the war he had spent his life preparing for had finally. And that it was not the war he had prepared for, and that the boy at the center of it could not be killed, contained, or spent. And that this fact, which had ruined every plan Albus Dumbledore ever made, might just be the only thing that could save them all if the boy could be kept, against everything the world was about to do to him, from becoming the monster they were so very determined to make. War had come to magical Britain. And the war could not kill the one soldier it most wanted dead. It would spend the next 2 years learning what that meant, the hard way, in blood that was never his, and the learning would cost more than anyone yet imagined. Because a thing that cannot be killed can still be wounded, just never where the curses land, and the wizarding world was about to go looking, with terrible diligence, for the places a healing factor could not reach. Harry Potter lay back down in the hospital bed, whole and unmarked and 14 years old, and closed his eyes and did not sleep, and listened to the country outside begin in its fear to sharpen itself against him. "Let them," the warrior said in the place under words old and patient and cold as the snow he had first remembered. "Let them all." The order came down in the autumn, and it came, as everything from that quarter came, dressed as procedure. Hester Crail presented it to the Wisengamot in a closed session, and she presented it well because she believed it, which was the thing that made her the most dangerous person in the building. She did not hate Harry Potter. She had met him twice and found him, both times, courteous and frightening in equal measure, and she had gone home both times and written in her private journal that she hoped to God it never fell to her to do what she was increasingly certain would one day have to be done. She believed in the state. She believed that a society in which a single individual stood beyond all law and all force was a society already dead, only waiting to discover it. And she believed that her duty, her grim, thankless, necessary duty, was to ensure that the state retained, even against this, the final word. So she stood before the Wisengamot and laid out the case with the cold clarity of a woman who had thought about nothing else for 3 years. And at the end of it she asked for, and received by a narrow and frightened vote, an instrument the magical world had not issued in 2 centuries. A standing sanction, secret, open-ended, authorizing the Department of Mysteries and a dedicated containment division to take any and all measures. Any and all, the language was specific. The language had been fought over for a week, necessary to neutralize the threat designated anomalous one, in the event that said threat should ever be judged to have turned against the lawful order of magical Britain. The judgment, of course, would be the Ministry's to make. That was the trick of it, the thing Hermione saw the instant the leaked text reached her hands. The thing she explained to Harry in the room the castle still gave them, her voice tight with a fury that had nowhere to go. The order did not authorize his killing. It authorized his killing whenever the Ministry decided he had become a threat, and a frightened Ministry could decide that on any morning it chose, after any incident it could engineer or misread, and the deciding and the doing would both happen in secret in windowless rooms by people who had spent 3 years building the means and now had at last the warrant. "They've made you an outlaw," Hermione said. "Not for anything you've done, for what you are, for the possibility of you. They've written a law that says the day they're frightened enough, they get to do whatever it takes, and they've spent 3 years making sure whatever it takes is a real thing and not an empty threat. The Department of Mysteries, Harry, they've been working on your blood for 3 years. This order is them telling each other they're allowed to use whatever they've built." Harry read the leaked text twice slowly, the way he read everything, and when he set it down his face was very calm. "Then they've made the same mistake Voldemort made in the graveyard," he said. "Both of them think the problem is how to stop me. It isn't. I've never once moved against the lawful order of anything. I went to school, I killed a troll that was going to kill you, I survived being murdered repeatedly by other people. The whole of my crime is that I can't be killed, and that frightens men who have built their power on being able to kill." He looked at her. "They think this order makes me safer to have around because now there's a leash on the table. But all they've actually done is guarantee that the first time they reach for it, the first time they decide they're frightened enough to use any and all measures, they'll be the ones who turned a man who'd never harmed them into an enemy who can't be stopped. They've pre-authorized the exact mistake that ends them. They've signed it, sealed it, and filed it." He almost smiled, and there was no warmth in it at all. "I've watched empires do this, Hermione. Build the weapon for the threat they're afraid of becoming, and in the building become it. The order isn't a leash, it's a countdown, and they started it themselves." Outside, the leaves came down over Scotland, and the war deepened, and somewhere under London men with a vial of unkillable blood read a newly signed warrant and understood that they had at last permission to find out whether the thing they were building actually worked. And Harry Potter went back to his training in the room the castle gave him, drawing the claws and sheathing them out and back, teaching his body the thing the whole world was so determined to make him use, and holding still. By choice he made every single day, the leash that was the only thing left between the man and the monster they all so badly wanted him to be. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The Berserker unleashed. It happened the way Harry had said it would, which gave him no comfort at all, because being right about the shape of a catastrophe does nothing to soften it when it lands. He was 15 and the two enemies had spent a year converging, and in the spring of that year they finally arrived by separate roads and for separate reasons at the same conclusion, that the way to a thing that could not be killed ran through the people it loved. Voldemort reached it out of a year of failed murders. His hatred curdled at last into the cold understanding that he could not put the boy down and would have to take him apart instead. The Ministry reached it out of a leaked report from the Department of Mysteries, which had finally, after 4 years, produced a device. A thing of bound runes and stolen blood, a dampener, a cage for the factor itself, and a recommendation that it be field-tested, and a frightened acknowledgement that it could only be tested on the subject, and that the subject would only hold still for it if there were something he held more precious than his own invulnerability. There were two somethings. And in the spring of Harry's 5th year, the Dark Lord and the State, without ever once coordinating, reached for the same lever on the same night. The bait was serious. It was clumsily done in the end, a forged vision, a planted fear, a lure to the Department of Mysteries itself, the windowless ministry under London where the unspeakables kept the prophecy and the blood in the half-built cage. Harry saw the trap for what it was the moment it was laid. The warrior did not miss a snare that obvious. But he also saw that a trap recognized is still a trap that has taken something, because the lure only worked if Sirius was already in danger. And Sirius was already in danger, because both his enemies had moved on the same night, and the lure was not the only thread being pulled. So Harry walked into the Department of Mysteries knowing it was an ambush, because the alternative was to leave his godfather inside it, and he had told Sirius in the gray dawn of his 3rd year that the people he loved would not be the price of what he was, and he had meant it, and a man who means a thing like that walks into the ambush every time. That is what the thing is for. That is the whole of what love does to a man who cannot die. It gives the world, at last, a door it can make him walk through. He brought no one. That was the one concession the warrior wrung from the man. Hermione had fought him on it, fought him harder than she had ever fought him on anything, because she had spent 4 years refusing to let him do the hard things alone, but Harry had held for once immovable, and the reason he gave was the only one that could have stopped her. "If you come, they have 2 levers instead of 1, he said. "Right now you're safe because they don't have you. The second you're in that building, you're the thing they take to make me hold still for the cage. I can survive anything they do to me. I can't survive them doing it to you. So you stay and you stay alive, and you be the reason I have to come back out. That's not me protecting you. That's me using you, Hermione, the smartest way I know how. You're my reason to walk back into the light. Don't take that from me by following me into the dark," she had stayed. It was the hardest thing he had ever asked of her, and she had done it, white-faced and furious and right, and Harry had gone down into the Department of Mysteries alone, into the ground beneath London, into the windowless heart of the state that had signed a warrant for his death, where his godfather was already fighting for his life and his enemies were already waiting. The battle in the Department of Mysteries was the worst night of Harry Potter's young life, and he had 100 lifetimes to compare it to. The Death Eaters were there, a dozen of them, Voldemort's elite, come for the prophecy and for the chance to bleed the boy who'd shamed them in the graveyard. And the Ministry was there too, a containment division in unmarked black, come with the half-built cage and orders to test it. And for 1 mad hour the two forces fought each other as much as they fought him, the Dark Army and the Secret State tangled in the same windowless rooms, each trying to reach the same boy for opposite reasons, and Harry moved through the middle of it like the thing he was, finding Sirius getting to him. The two of them fighting back to back through the wheeling chaos toward a way out that kept not being there. And Harry was winning. That was the thing that made what came after so unbearable. He was winning claws and wand, the warrior at full output, taking the Death Eaters' wands and breaking the containment division's lines, carving a path toward the exit with his godfather at his back. And for an hour it looked as though he would do the impossible thing again, walk into the ambush and walk back out of it with the man he loved alive. The cage stopped him. The Unspeakables fired it at the right moment, the moment Harry was between Sirius and a knot of Death Eaters with his claws out and his back exposed. And the dampener took him from behind, a net of bound runes and his own stolen blood that did not wound him because wounds were nothing to him, but did the thing the Department of Mysteries had spent 4 years learning to do, which was reach past the body to the engine underneath and turn it down. For 10 seconds, only 10, it was all the half-built thing could manage. Harry Potter's healing factor guttered like a candle in wind. And in those 10 seconds he was, for the first time since he was 11 years old, an ordinary man, a 15-year-old boy with knives in his hands and no second skeleton holding him up. He felt it go. He felt the cold certainty that had carried him across 100 lives simply switch off, and the warrior, who had built every instinct around a body that could not stay hurt, found himself suddenly mortal in the middle of a battle he had fought as an immortal, and the recalibration took a half-second, and the half-second was the price. Because in that half-second, Bellatrix Lestrange's curse, meant for Harry's exposed back, took Sirius Black through the chest instead, because Sirius, who did not know the factor was down, who had spent the whole battle trusting that his godson could not be hurt and so guarding only Harry's life and never his own, stepped into it, the way he had stepped into everything, the way a man steps who has decided that the boy behind him matters more than the man in front, and the green light took him. And Sirius Black fell. He fell backward through the veil that stood in that room, the old archway the Unspeakables kept and studied and did not understand. And he was dead before he reached it, dead in the air, the light already gone out of the eyes that had wept over Harry in the shrieking shack, and the body that had stayed sane 12 years in Azkaban on a single thread of love passed through the veil and was gone past any door even Harry could follow through, and the factor came back on a half-second later, 10 seconds spent. And Harry Potter stood whole and unkillable in the heart of the state that had built the cage, and his godfather was dead on the wrong side of a veil because the one time it mattered, the one time in 100 lifetimes, the body that always saved him had been switched off by men who feared him for exactly 1/2 of 1 second too long. For a moment, Harry did not move. The battle wheeled around him. The Death Eaters laughed, Bellatrix loudest of all, shrieking her triumph. The containment division readied the cage for a second pull, jubilant that it had worked, that they had proof that the factor could be dampened. And in the center of it, Harry Potter stood and looked at the veil through which the second warm thing in his life had vanished. And somewhere very far down in the place under words, the thing he had held on a leash since he was 11 years old, since he was Logan, since he was James Howlett, since the first push of bone through a child's hands in a cold house a century ago, the thing he had held on a leash across every life he could remember, felt the leash for the first time go slack, not snap. He would want that understood after in whatever quiet was left to him. It did not snap, he let it go. There is a difference, and it is the whole of the difference between a man and a weapon, and Harry Potter, standing in the wreckage with his godfather dead, made even then, even there, a choice. He looked at the men who had built the cage and the woman who had cast the curse and the whole machinery of fear that had spent 5 years reaching for the people he loved until at last it took one. And he decided coldly, completely, with the last clear part of his mind before the red came up, that they had asked for this, all of them, that they had spent 5 years in a signed warrant in a half-built cage demanding to see what was under the leash, and that he was finally going to show them. "You wanted the monster," Harry said quietly into the wheeling dark, and then he stopped holding it, the red came up. He had spent 100 lifetimes describing it to himself in the quiet after, trying to find the words for the thing that took him when the leash went slack, and he had never found them because the thing did not happen in words. It happened underneath them, in the old animal at the back of the skull, the part that had come awake on a stormy island when the letters fell like snow, the part that had never once been afraid. When the berserker took him, the words went out, and the strategy went out, and the careful man who took wands instead of throats went out. And what was left was the oldest thing he was, not Harry, not even quite Logan, but the thing under both of them, the feral core that a century of war had honed, and that no amount of choosing had ever fully tamed. Rage given a body, grief given claws, the whole unbearable arithmetic of his existence resolved at last into the single clean variable of violence. Bellatrix Lestrange was still laughing when he reached her. She was the best of Voldemort's killers, fast and vicious and decades practiced, and she got one curse off, and it took him in the chest and opened him to the spine and did not slow him by so much as a step, because the Factor was back and the Berserker did not feel the wounds it healed, and then Harry was inside her guard, and the woman who had murdered his godfather had time to stop laughing and no time at all to do anything else. He did not take her wand. The careful man took wands. The thing he had become took the hand that held it, and then it took more, and Bellatrix Lestrange's triumph turned to sound that silenced every other sound in the Department of Mysteries. And the dark army that had laughed a moment before understood all at once in the cold of their stomachs that they had finally done the thing the whole war had been about. They had given the unkillable boy a reason. What followed was not a battle. A battle has two sides, the Death Eaters tried. They were brave in their way, the elite of a dark cause, and they had wands and numbers and the windowless rooms to corner him in, and none of it mattered, none of it touched the edges of mattering, because the thing loose among them did not fight the way wizards fought and could not be fought the way wizards fought back. It came through their curses. It came through their shields. It came through the walls when the doors were too slow. It moved faster than fear could spread, so that the man at the back of the room was dying before the man at the front had finished screaming. And it did not tire and it did not slow, and every wound they put in it closed before the next curse left the wand. And one by one in the dark under London, the most feared killers in magical Britain learned the answer to the question the whole world had been asking for 5 years. What happens if you actually make him use it? And the answer unmade them. The containment division learned it too. They had come with the cage and they fired it again, the dampener, the half-built thing of runes and stolen blood, and it caught him a second time and the Factor guttered a second time, and for 10 seconds Harry Potter was mortal in the middle of his own rampage. It did not save them. It was the thing the unspeakables had never accounted for, the variable no committee had modeled, because they had built the cage to stop a man who could not be hurt, and they had never asked what the cage would do against a man who had stopped caring whether he could be. The Berserker did not need the Factor. The Factor was for surviving. The Berserker had stopped in that hour being interested in surviving. It was interested in only one thing, and it pursued that one thing through 10 seconds of mortality without a flicker of hesitation. Because a man who does not fear death is dangerous, and a man who has decided in his grief that he might even welcome it is something no weapon ever built can stop. And the containment division, who had spent 5 years certain that the way to control a thing was to threaten its life, discovered in the dark that they had spent 5 years arming themselves against the one fear their target no longer had. The cage broke against him, then the men who carried it broke, and then there was no one left in the windowless rooms to fire it again. He did not remember most of it after. That was the mercy and the horror of the Berserker both. It took the wheel and it did not keep a log. He remembered fragments the way he remembered the lives disconnected and total, a mask coming apart, a wand snapping, a man's eyes going from contempt to terror in the space of a single breath, the particular silence of a room in which he was the only thing still standing. He remembered the cold. The Berserker was always cold, colder than the careful man, cold all the way down, the cold of the snow he had first remembered in a bedroom in Surrey, the cold of a body built to keep killing long after the man inside it would have stopped. And he remembered at the very end that he could not stop. That was the part no one ever warned a man about either, not the dying, not the loving, but this, that the thing you keep on a leash once you let it go does not come back simply because the enemies are gone. The Death Eaters were down. The containment division was down. The Department of Mysteries was a ruin and a charnel, and there was nothing left in it to fight, and the Berserker did not care, because the Berserker was not fighting enemies, it was burning grief, and the grief was not gone just because the men who'd caused it were. And so the thing wearing Harry Potter's body turned in the silence toward the only living things left in the building, which were the wounded, the disarmed, the crawling, the ones who had thrown down their wands and were trying now only to live. And it began coldly, methodically to finish them. This was the wound that scarred, not the curses which closed, not Sirius, though Sirius would never close, not ever, not across whatever lifetimes were left. The wound that scarred Harry Potter, the only wound a healing factor could not touch, was the thing he was about to do in the silence of that ruined place to men who were no longer fighting him. And the worst of it, the part he would carry into every quiet for the rest of his long existence, was that some cold part of him, even then, even lost in the red, felt that they had earned it. Felt that 5 years of fear and a signed warrant and a half-built cage and a dead godfather had bought them every terrible thing the Berserker was about to spend, and he was reaching for the nearest of them, a young man in containment black who had dropped his wand and was holding up his hands and weeping, a man who looked under the fear, no older than 20, a man who had been sent down here by his betters to do a job he had not understood, when a voice he knew cut through the red. Harry. Hermione had not stayed, she had stayed at first. She had kept the promise as long as the promise could be kept, sat in the room the castle gave them with her hands clenched and her clever mind running every scenario, and somewhere past midnight she had understood, the way she understood everything, that there was one scenario Harry had not accounted for, the one where he won the battle and lost himself, where the thing he held on a leash got loose, and there was no one left alive in that building he loved enough to leash it again. And she had understood that the only person in the world who could be that for him was her, and that the smartest, hardest, most necessary thing she could do was the exact thing he had told her not to. And Hermione Granger had spent 4 years learning when Harry Potter was right and when he was only afraid, and she had judged correctly that this was the second thing, and she had come. She came down into the Department of Mysteries alone, and she found the ruin he had made. And she did not let herself look at most of it because she needed her mind whole for the one thing she had come to do. And she crossed the charnel toward the only thing still standing, the thing that had been the boy she'd sat across from on a train when they were 11, and she planted her feet in the wreckage, and she said his name into the red, loud, clear. The way you say a name to wake a sleeper from a dream that is killing them. Harry, the thing turned toward her. For one moment, the longest moment of her life, longer than the moment the Trolls Club came down, longer than the moment in the graveyard when she'd waited to learn if the portkey would bring him back, for one moment she looked into the eyes of the thing wearing her best friend's face, and there was nothing in them she recognized. The berserker looked at her the way it looked at everything in that hour, coldly as a variable, and its hands were red to the wrist, and there was a young man weeping behind it, and the claws were out, and Hermione Granger, 15 years old, unarmed against a thing that had just unmade a dark army and a containment division both, did the only thing she had ever known how to do with the worst, truest thing about Harry Potter. She did not run, she leaned in. "It's me," she said, and her voice shook and held. "It's Hermione, you know me, you've known me since the train, I'm the one who sat across from you. I'm the one who stayed while you did the hard, ugly thing and didn't ask you to be gentler than the world was. I'm still here. I came down here against everything you told me because I'm the only one left who can, and I'm not going to run, and I'm not going to be afraid of you because I have never once been afraid of you, not the right way and not the wrong way, and I'm not going to start now." She took a step toward the thing with the red hands. "Sirius is gone, I know, Harry. And it's the worst thing, and it's not your fault, and you couldn't have stopped it, and burning down the whole world won't bring him back through that veil. You taught me that. You told me in the dark that the dying is a door and the coming back is cold and the body stands you up whether you want it to or not. So stand up, not the body, you. Come back. It's cold, I know it's cold. Come back anyway. Come back to me. I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. Come back." And she reached out, the cleverest witch of her age, and she put her hand, small, unarmed, steady, flat against the chest of the thing that could have ended her with a thought, over the heart of the boy she had decided to keep on a train when they were children, and she left it there and she waited and she did not look away. The berserker stood with her hand on its chest. And somewhere under the red, in the place under words, the thing that was older than Harry and older than Logan and older than any country either of them had crossed, felt the one weight it had never been able to throw off, the one anchor that had held across 100 lives, not the body that wouldn't die, but the person who wouldn't leave. In the red, which had drowned the careful man and the strategist and everything that chose, found that it could not drown the smallest and most stubborn thing of all. Which was a hand on his chest and a voice that had decided 4 years ago on a train that whatever he was, she was staying. Harry came back. It was not sudden. It came the way the lives came, in pieces, the cold receding by inches, the red draining out of the edges of his vision, the words coming back one at a time, and the first whole thought he had as himself, as Harry standing in the ruin he had made with his best friend's hand on his chest and a weeping young man at his back, was the thought that would scar him, the thought he would carry into every quiet for the rest of his long life. I was going to kill him. He'd thrown down his wand and I was going to kill him, and part of me wanted to, and the only reason I didn't is that she came. Not because I stopped myself, because she stopped me. I couldn't have stopped myself, I'd already stopped trying. He looked down at the claws, he looked at his hands, red to the wrist. He looked at the ruin around him, the dark army and the statesmen both. The cost of letting the leash go, the proof, final, total, witnessed by no one who would survive to tell it but the weeping man and the girl, of exactly what was under the thing he had held since he was 11. He drew the claws back. The skin sealed over them, clean, whole, as it always did, healing the only wounds it could reach and leaving untouched the one it never would. "Hermione," he said, and his voice was wrecked and small and entirely his own. "Hermione, I know," she said. Her hand was still on his chest. Her eyes were wet, but they did not leave his. "I know, I've got you. It's over. It's not over." He was looking past her now at the young man in containment black, 20 years old, still alive, still weeping, alive only because a girl had come down into the dark against orders. I was going to kill him. He'd given up. He was done. And I was going to do it anyway, and I'd have done it slow, and there's a part of me that's still angry it didn't get to. He made himself say it because the warrior had learned across 100 lives that the only thing you can do with the worst truth about yourself is look at it in the light. That's what's under the leash, Hermione. That's the thing they all wanted to see, not the claws, not the healing, the thing that wanted to keep going after the fight was won. I've spent every life I can remember holding it, and tonight they finally pulled hard enough and I let go, and you saw what's down there. His jaw worked. Everyone always wonders why I hold the leash so tight. Now you know, because that's what happens when I don't. Hermione was quiet for a long moment in the ruin with her hand on his chest. Then she said with the fierce, clear stubbornness that was the whole of why he kept her, the only person alive who had seen the very bottom of him and not stepped back, "I saw it, and it's terrible, and it's real, and you're right not to pretend it isn't." She pressed her hand harder against his chest, an anchor, a fact. "And I also saw the thing that came back. I saw you put the claws away with a man still breathing behind you when every part of you wanted him dead." The leash slipped Harry. It didn't break, there's a difference, and it's the whole difference, and it's the only thing that's ever mattered about you, not that you can't be killed, but that with all that under there, all that rage, 100 years of it, and a body that can do anything it wants and walk away clean, you still choose every single day to be more than the thing they're afraid of. You slipped tonight, and then you chose again. That's not the monster's story. The monster doesn't choose again. She held his eyes. Sirius died believing you were worth stepping in front of. Don't you dare make him wrong. Don't you dare let them turn you into the thing they signed a warrant for after he died proving you weren't it. And Harry Potter, in the ruin he had made, with the worst truth about himself laid bare in the dark, and the one person who had ever seen it refusing still to look away, bowed his head, and let the grief come, not the berserker's cold, but the real thing, the hot human thing, a boy weeping for a godfather gone past a veil. And Hermione caught him as he came apart, and held him up in the wreckage the way she had held him up since a train when they were children. And the young man in containment black watched the unkillable boy weep in his best friend's arms over the body of a man he loved, and understood, in a way no committee report would ever capture, that the thing the Ministry had spent 5 years preparing to destroy had just spared his life while breaking its own heart, and that whatever Harry Potter was, the word monster had never once been the right one. He got out. He carried the news up into the light, the one survivor, and the story he told did not match the story the Ministry wanted, and that mattered later more than anyone yet knew. But that was later. In the dark of the Department of Mysteries, there was only a boy and a girl, and the body of a man past a veil. And the long, cold understanding settling into Harry like the metal had settled into Logan's bones, that the world had finally found the place his healing could not reach and had wounded him there, and that the wound would not close, not ever, and that he would carry it serious, and the thing he had almost become, reaching for the weeping man. Into every quiet for the rest of a life that would not end. He had been unkillable his whole life across every life. He learned that night the thing the Factor had never been able to teach him and the Dementors had only hinted at, that there are wounds worse than death, and that a man who cannot die is not spared them but condemned to carry them, whole and unhealing, longer than anyone else ever could. The Berserker had been unleashed. The world had seen the bottom of him. And Harry Potter walked up out of the dark a changed thing, not broken. They had not managed broken. Hermione had reached him before broken, but marked at last, in the one place nothing could mend, and more dangerous for it, and more determined, and more sure than ever of the only choice that had ever mattered. To hold the leash every day for the rest of forever, because he had seen now exactly what waited on the other side of letting it go. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. The immortal. The truth came out the way truth does in a war, too late to prevent the worst of it, and exactly in time to change the end. The young man in containment black, the one Harry had spared, did not give the Ministry the story the Ministry wanted. He stood in front of the Wisengamot, 20 years old and shaking, and he told them what he had actually seen in the dark under London. A boy who had been ambushed by 2 armies at once, a containment cage that had got his godfather killed, a rage that had unmade everyone who fought him, and then a girl and a hand on a chest, and a thing that could have ended the last man breathing, choosing instead to weep. He told them the unkillable boy had spared him with murder in his eyes and his godfather dead at his feet, and he asked the Wisengamot in a voice that cracked, what kind of monster does that, and what kind of men were they that they had spent 5 years building a cage for it? It did not save the Ministry from itself. Frightened institutions are not saved by testimony. But it split them, the believers in the cage, against those who had heard the young man and could not unhear him, and a divided ministry is a slow ministry, and the slowness bought time, and in a war against a thing of smoke and rot, time was the only currency that had ever mattered, because the cage had also taught Voldemort something. The Dark Lord had agents in the Department of Mysteries, as he had agents everywhere, and the report reached him within the week. The boy's factor could be dampened. 10 seconds. A half-built thing of runes and stolen blood. And Lord Voldemort, who had spent 2 years failing to kill what could not be killed, read the report and felt, for the first time since the graveyard, something he had almost forgotten how to feel, which was hope, the cold hope of a man who has finally been handed the shape of his enemy's one weakness. If the factor could be turned off, even for 10 seconds, then the boy could be killed in those 10 seconds, and if the boy could be killed, then the universe still obeyed the one law on which Lord Voldemort had staked his entire existence, that death holds. He needed the cage. So he took it, sent his elite into the ruin under London where the Ministry was still cataloguing its dead, and seized the half-built dampener and the research behind it and the unspeakable who understood it best, and he carried all of it back to his stolen manor and set his finest minds to finishing what the state had started. And through the long final winter of the war, while a divided Ministry argued and a grieving boy trained in the room the castle gave him, Lord Voldemort built at last the thing that could give him his 10 seconds. Harry knew it was coming. Of course he knew. The warrior did not miss the shape of an endgame. Hermione had worked out the rest from the pattern of Voldemort's raids, what he was taking, what he was building, what it meant. And the two of them sat in the room the castle gave them, 16 years old now, grown into the people the war had made them, and faced the truth of the thing together. He's going to dampen you, Hermione said. Get his 10 seconds, and in those 10 seconds he's going to do what the cage couldn't, because he won't hesitate the way the Ministry did. He'll have the green light ready, and he'll spend it the instant the factor's down. That's the whole endgame, Harry. 2 years of failing taught him the one way it could work, and now he's building it. Yes, Harry said, so we have to stop him from finishing the dampener or we have to— No, he said it quietly and she stopped because she had learned the difference in his quiets. We let him finish it, we let him get his 10 seconds, we let him think he solved me. He looked at her and the two old eyes were very steady. Because there's a thing he doesn't know, Hermione. A thing I worked out a long time ago and never told anyone because the only way it stays a weapon is if no one knows I have it. He spent 30 years making himself unkillable by cutting his soul into pieces. 7 pieces, the Horcruxes. As long as one of them survives, he can't truly die. The body falls and the soul anchors and he comes back. That's his whole immortality. That's the law he trusts. Harry leaned forward. And here's the thing he's never once stopped to consider because his whole life is built on not considering it. His immortality and mine are not the same kind. He cheats death, I outlast it, and those two things put in a room together do not cancel out, they compound. Hermione's clever face went still, working it. What do you mean compound? I mean, Harry said, that he spent 2 years trying to find a way to make death hold for me, and he's about to succeed for 10 seconds. And in those 10 seconds, he's going to learn that he has made the single greatest mistake of his entire long existence. Because the one thing more dangerous than a man who can't be killed is a man who can't be killed standing next to a man who has made himself unable to truly die. He's built a war of attrition, Hermione, the longest one in history. And he's about to find out that attrition is the only game I have never in 100 lifetimes lost. The end came at Hogwarts because all wars come home and Voldemort brought everything. He came in the spring with his army at his back and his finished cage in the hands of his finest, and he came for the school because the school was where the boy was and because a dark lord who has solved the unsolvable wants the solving witnessed, wants the whole world to see the unkillable boy fall at last so that the law he has staked his life on is restored in front of everyone. He surrounded the castle. He broke its ancient wards over a long and terrible night while the defenders, students, teachers, the slow-arriving remnants of a divided ministry that had finally chosen its side too late to matter much, held the walls and died holding them. And Harry Potter walked out through the breaking wards to meet him, alone, because the one thing he would not do was let the castle full of children become the lever. And because some endings have to be walked into the same way the ambushes were, awake and ready and on your own feet. He found Voldemort in the ruin of the courtyard with the Death Eaters ringed around and the cage ready, and the Dark Lord looked at the boy walking toward him through the smoke and smiled the smile of a man who has, after 30 years, finally accounted for everything. You came, Voldemort said. Good. I had a speech prepared about all the ways I have learned you, but I find I would rather simply show you. He raised a hand. Now. And his finest fired the cage, the finished thing, and it took Harry Potter and held, and the factor did not gutter this time. It went out, the full dampener, the completed work, 2 years of stolen genius. And for the first time since he was 11 years old, Harry felt the second skeleton go quiet, felt the cold certainty switch all the way off, felt himself become, completely and without reservation, a mortal man standing alone in front of the most dangerous wizard in the world. There Voldemort breathed, savoring it. There you are, just a boy after all. I have spent 2 years and a great many lives learning how to make you only a boy, and here you are only a boy, and now, he raised his wand, and the green light gathered at its tip, the curse that had never failed, the law of the world made manifest. Now, Harry Potter, you will do the one thing you have never managed. You will stay down. You spent 2 years, Harry said, and he did not raise his wand, and he did not run, and he did not flinch, learning how to kill me, and you never once spent 10 minutes asking what happens to you when you do. The green light left the wand. It crossed the courtyard. It took Harry Potter square in the chest, a mortal man with his factor switched off, and it did the thing it was made to do, the thing it had only ever failed to do twice, and this time it did not fail. Harry's heart stopped. His knees went. The light went out of the green eyes, and the boy who could not die fell at last in front of the whole assembled war, dead on the stones of the courtyard where he had first arrived as a child of 11. The defenders on the walls cried out. Voldemort threw back his head and laughed, the cold high laugh of a man who has restored the universe to its proper order, who has proven in front of everyone that death holds, that the law is the law, that even the exception was only ever a matter of finding the right cage. He had won. After 30 years, after 2 years of this impossible boy, he had won, and he turned to his army to receive their triumph. And on the stones, Harry Potter's factor came back on. The cage gave its 10 seconds. It had always only given 10 seconds. That was the limit of even the finished thing, 10 seconds of mortality, and Voldemort had spent them perfectly, had killed the boy clean inside the window. But the boy he had killed was not a thing that died in 10 seconds and stayed dead. The boy he had killed was a thing that died and came back, and the cage's 10 seconds ended, and the factor woke, and it found a stopped heart and a dead body. And it did the only thing it had ever known how to do, the thing it had done 100 times across 100 lives, the thing no curse and no cage had ever been able to teach it not to do. It stood him back up. Whether he wanted it to or not, the way it always had, the way it always would. Harry Potter rose from the dead on the stones of Hogwarts, in front of the Dark Lord's whole army, in front of the defenders on the walls, in front of the divided ministry and the smoke and the war. And he came up the way he always came up, all at once, dragging the 100 deaths up with him and feeling everyone and standing anyway, and he lifted his head and looked at Lord Voldemort across the ruined courtyard, and he opened his hands and the claws came out. And his voice carried to every soul on every wall. That's 3, Harry said. 3 times now you've put the green light in me and made it hold, and 3 times the universe has handed it back. And do you understand yet, Tom? Do you finally understand, with your 10 seconds spent and your cage empty and nothing left to dampen me, with what you've actually done? He took a step, and the whole army took a step back. You taught the world that death holds, you staked your life on it. And I am the standing, walking, breathing, resurrecting proof that for me it doesn't, and you have just spent your one weapon proving it in front of everyone. Your cage is empty. It only had the 10 seconds and you used them, and I'm still here, and now there's nothing in your arsenal, nothing in the world, nothing you spent 30 years building that can put me down even for the length of a breath. He smiled, and there was no warmth in it, only 100 lifetimes of cold certainty. So let's find out which of us actually built the better immortality. Yours, that cheats death by hiding pieces of your soul where you think I'll never reach them, or mine that just refuses to stay dead. Let's put them in a room together, Tom, and see which one's still standing at the end. I already know the answer. I've known since the graveyard. You're about to learn it the way you learn everything, too late and the hard way and in front of everyone. What Voldemort did not know, what no one in that courtyard knew except Harry and Hermione and a dead old man's portrait, was that the war had not only been fought on the walls. It had been fought in secret, through the long winter in the spaces the battles left, and it had been fought over exactly the thing Voldemort believed safest. Albus Dumbledore had kept his promise to himself in the end. Before the year that killed him, the old man had set down the board at last and told Harry the whole truth, the prophecy and the Horcruxes both. Every anchor the Dark Lord had hidden his soul inside, every place death had been told to wait. And Harry, who could not be killed, who could walk into any vault and any cave and any guarded dark and survive whatever waited there, had spent the winter doing the one task in all the world he was uniquely, perfectly, unkillably built to do. He had gone to the places no mortal could survive, and he had survived them, and one by one, through the cold months while Voldemort built his cage, Harry Potter had hunted down the pieces of the Dark Lord's soul and destroyed them. The locket in its poison cave, where the price of reaching it was a death, and Harry had paid the death and the price and got up because that was the one currency he had in endless supply, the cup behind its dragon and its fire, the diadem in the room the castle gave to those who needed it. The snake, last of all, taken in the first minutes of the battle while Voldemort was breaking the wards, its head off before the Dark Lord felt the loss. One by one, all winter, the anchors of Lord Voldemort's immortality had been pulled up and burned, by the one creature in the world that could reach them and live, and Voldemort had not noticed, because Voldemort was a man who could not imagine an enemy walking into deaths on purpose, because Voldemort had spent 30 years fleeing the very thing Harry used as a tool. In the last Horcrux, the one even Dumbledore had despaired of, the one buried in the boy's own scar, the fragment of soul that had lodged in Harry the night the curse first failed, that one Voldemort himself had just destroyed. The green light in the courtyard in the 10 seconds the cage gave him had killed Harry clean, and in killing him had burned out the fragment of Voldemort's own soul that lived in him. The way you cannot kill the host without killing the parasite, and the factor had brought Harry back and left the fragment dead, because the factor restored what was Harry's and had never had any use for what was not. So when Harry Potter rose from the dead on the stones of Hogwarts and told the Dark Lord they would now find out which immortality was the better built, he was not bluffing and he was not boasting. He was stating flatly, the way the warrior stated everything, a fact that Voldemort did not yet possess. That the Horcruxes were gone, all 7, that the soul cut into pieces had been gathered back into a single mortal man over the course of one quiet winter, and that the most dangerous wizard in the world was now, for the first time in 30 years, exactly as killable as everyone else, and standing in front of a thing that wasn't. "You're mortal, Tom," Harry said, walking toward him through the smoke, claws out, dead and risen and whole. "I made you mortal. All winter while you built your cage, I was unbuilding your soul because I'm the one thing in the world that can walk into the places you hid it and come back out. The locket, the cup, the diadem, the snake, the piece you put in me yourself the night you first failed, you just burned it out with your own curse. They're gone, every anchor, every cheat. 30 years of fleeing death undone in one winter by a boy who uses death as a doorway." He was close now, very close, and the green eyes held the red. "You spent 2 years learning to kill me, and you finally managed it for 10 seconds, and in those 10 seconds you destroyed the last thing keeping you immortal and didn't even know you were doing it. That's the trap, Tom. That was always the trap. The only way to kill me was to make death hold, and the only way to make death hold for me was to put your own last piece in the line of fire. You couldn't kill me without unkilling yourself. And now here we are, you mortal, for the first time in 30 years, me exactly what I've always been." The claws caught the firelight. "Let's finish it," Voldemort, to his credit, understood. It took him only a moment. He was the cleverest dark wizard of the age, and the whole architecture of his ruin assembled itself in his mind in a single horrified instant. And to his credit, when he understood that he was mortal and alone in front of a thing that was not, he did not run the way he had run from the graveyard. There was nowhere left to run to. A man with Horcruxes can flee and rebuild. A man with none, facing the unkillable, has only the fight in front of him, and Lord Voldemort had been many terrible things across his long life, but he had never, at the very end, been a coward when there was no cowardice left that could help him. He fought. He fought the way only the most powerful wizard of the age could fight, and the courtyard became a thing out of legend. the dark wizard at the absolute peak of his terrible art against the warrior who could not be stopped. And for long minutes the smoke lit with everything Voldemort had fiendfire that Harry walked through, burning and healing, killing curses that took him down and could not keep him, transfigurations and bindings and horrors with no names. The entire arsenal of 30 years of dark genius thrown against a single 16-year-old boy with knives of bone. And Harry simply outlasted it. That was the whole of the ending, and it was the only ending there had ever been going to be, since a graveyard 2 years before, since a troll's bathroom 5 years before, since a white room 100 years before that. Voldemort threw everything and everything failed, and every spell that should have ended Harry only bought the Dark Lord a few more seconds before the boy got up again. And a man, even the greatest of men, has only so much in him, and a thing that does not tire and does not stay hurt and does not in the end die has all the time in the world. Voldemort spent his power. Harry spent nothing but pain, which he had in endless supply. And the gap between a man at his limit and a thing with no limit at all widened, second by second, curse by curse, until at last Lord Voldemort stood in the smoke of his own broken army with his power spent and his soul whole and mortal and his every weapon proven useless, facing a boy walking toward him out of the latest of 100 deaths, and there was nothing left. No Horcrux to anchor him, no cage to dampen the boy, no curse that would hold, no army still standing. Nothing between Tom Riddle and the thing he had spent his entire existence fleeing. Harry reached him. He did not gloat at the end. The warrior had no taste for it, and the grief was too close under everything serious and the 100 lives and the long cold knowledge of what it was to be the last one standing. He simply looked at the man who had murdered his parents and his godfather and 1,000 others, the man who had spent 30 years making the whole world afraid of death so that he would not have to face his own. And Harry Potter did the thing he had been built across 100 lifetimes to do, and did it clean and quick, and without the berserker, with the leash held tight the way he had sworn it would be held, a man, not a monster, ending a war. "You were so afraid of dying," Harry said quietly to the falling man, "that you turned your whole self into a thing that couldn't live. And then you met me and you spent everything you had learning how to die just to try and stop me. You did this, all of it. You made the cage that made you mortal. You threw the curse that burned out your last piece. Every step that brought you here you took, running from the one door everyone has to walk through eventually." The claws found their mark and the red eyes went wide, and at the very last there was in them not rage and not hatred, but only the small lost terror of the orphanage boy who had started all of it, the boy who had only ever wanted not to die. "It was always going to be me," Harry told him almost gently. "The one who couldn't be killed, ending the one who couldn't bear to be. Go on, Tom, through the door. It's not as bad as you spent your whole life believing. I should know. I've been through it 100 times." And Lord Voldemort died, truly died mortally, finally, his whole soul gathered and unanchored and spent on the stones of Hogwarts in the grey light of a breaking dawn, ended at last not by a curse or a prophecy or a clever plan, but by the simplest and oldest thing in the world, a thing that outlasted him. The smoke rose, the courtyard fell silent. And on the walls and in the rubble, the defenders of Hogwarts looked down at the boy standing alone over the body of the most feared wizard in the world, 16 years old, dead 3 times that morning and standing anyway, whole and unmarked and terrible and tired, and understood all of them at once that the war was over and that it had been won, and that the thing that had won it was something none of them had a name for. And that the only word that had ever fit it was the one the Ministry had spent 5 years trying to make into a curse. The unkillable boy. He had outlasted the Dark Lord. He had outlasted death itself again, the way he always would. And now, in the silence of the dawn, with the war ended and the body cooling at his feet, Harry Potter turned to face the other thing he had never been able to kill. The thing that was even now picking itself up out of the rubble and reaching by reflex, by terror, by 5 years of habit for the warrant it had signed, the state, the ministry, the frightened men who had built the cage that won the war and would now surely want it back. Hestia Crail came to him across the courtyard because of course it was her. She was the one who had started the file, and she was the kind of person who finished what she started, and she came through the smoke with the warrant in her hand and 2 surviving Aurors at her back and a face that was, for once, not closed at all but openly, nakedly afraid. She had watched the whole of it from the walls. She had watched the boy she had spent 5 years preparing to destroy die 3 times, and rise 3 times, and end the Dark Lord that her entire ministry could not. She had watched the cage, her cage, the state's cage, the thing she had argued for in a closed session of the Wisengamot, turn out to be the very instrument that made the victory possible, and she had felt, watching it, the whole architecture of her certainty come apart, because she had built 5 years of grim necessary work on the premise that the unkillable boy was a threat to be contained, and she had just watched the unkillable boy save every soul on those walls, including hers, at the cost of dying for them. Repeatedly in front of everyone, she stopped a few feet from him, the warrant was in her hand, she looked at it and she looked at him, and Harry watched her do the arithmetic she had been avoiding for 5 years and waited. "The order," she said, her voice was not steady. "The standing sanction, it's still by law, it's still." She stopped. She made herself look at the body of Voldemort and then at the walls full of the living and then back at the boy. "You knew about the Horcruxes. You spent the winter destroying them. You walked into a poison cave and a guarded vault in your own death over and over to make him mortal so that he could be ended. You did the one thing none of us could do, and you did it by using the exact thing we spent 5 years afraid of." She was very pale. "We built a cage for the only weapon that could win this war, and you let us." You let us build it and test it and hand it to him because it was the only way to make him mortal, Harry said quietly. He had to believe he'd solved me. He had to spend his last piece trying. The cage you built was the bait, Madame Krail. I needed him to think death could hold me so he'd be confident enough to put his own soul in the line of fire proving it. Your fear was the most useful weapon I had, so yes, I let you build it. I let you sign the warrant. I let you spend 5 years getting ready to kill me because every bit of it pointed him exactly where I needed him to go. He held her eyes, and there was no cruelty in it, only the flat, cold honesty that had unsettled her in a borrowed office 5 years before. And now we're standing here and the war's over and you've still got that paper in your hand and we both know what it says and we both know it doesn't matter anymore, and I think you came over here so I could be the one to say so. So I'll say it. He reached out slowly so the Aurors would not do anything they'd regret, and he took the warrant from her hand and she let him, and he looked at it. The long, dull, deadly language she had fought over for a week, any and all measures necessary to neutralize the threat designated anomalous one, and then he closed his fist around it and the claws came out through his knuckles and through the parchment and the warrant fell to the stones in pieces. There's no leash for me, Madame Krail, Harry said. There never was. You spent 5 years and a fortune and a great many windowless rooms learning that, and it's the most expensive lesson the ministry's ever bought, and I'd like it to be the last time you have to buy it. So here are the terms, and they're not negotiable, and they're also, and I want you to hear this part because it's the part your fear has never let you believe they're generous. He sheathed the claws. The pieces of the warrant stirred in the dawn wind. I don't want your throne. I don't want your ministry. I've watched empires rise and fall across more years than your country's been a country, and I have no interest in running one. I want to finish school. I want to be left alone. I want the people I love to grow old since I can't, that's all. That's the whole of what the unkillable boy wants from the state that spent 5 years planning his murder. He looked at her steadily. You can have your ministry back, govern it well, govern it better than the men who signed it. And the day you ever again decide that the answer to a thing you can't control is to build a cage and a warrant in the dark, remember this courtyard. Remember that the last time you did it, the thing you were afraid of turned out to be the only reason any of you are alive to be afraid at all. Hestia Krail looked at the pieces of the warrant on the stones, and at the boy who had just handed her back her own government, and she did a thing she had not done in 5 years, which was set down the certainty she had carried, and she nodded once slowly, the nod of a functionary recognizing at last that some things do not go in the ledger, that some territories cannot be mapped or moved, only live beside. Yes, she said. All right, yes. And then, because she was, underneath the fear, a decent woman who had done a terrible thing for what she'd believed were good reasons. I'm sorry, Mr. Potter, for all of it. We were so afraid of what you might do that we never once stopped to ask what you actually were. Most people don't, Harry said. She did. And he looked past Krail across the smoking courtyard to where Hermione Granger was coming toward him over the rubble, scratched and ash-streaked and alive, having held the castle's evacuation together through the whole long night the way she held everything together. And the cold went out of Harry's face for the first time since the Department of Mysteries, and what came into it was the one warm thing the war had not managed to take. They buried the dead over the following days, and Harry stood at every grave, because he had buried everyone across 100 lives, and he had learned that the one thing you owe the dead is to look at where they're put. He stood longest at the empty stone they raised for Sirius, who had gone past a veil and could not be buried, and he did not weep there because he had done his weeping in the dark under London, but he stood and he remembered, and he let the grief be what it was, a wound that would not close, carried by a thing that could not die, the one scar the factor would never reach. It doesn't get easier, he told Hermione at the empty stone in the long gold evening. That's the part I never tell anyone. People think a thing that can't die must get used to the dying of others. You don't, you just get a longer list. He looked at the stone with his godfather's name on it. I'm going to outlive you too, you and everyone. That's the shape of it, the real shape under all the rest. The war's the easy part. The war ends. This, he touched the cold stone. This is the thing I actually can't survive, and I survive it anyway over and over because the body won't let me leave. Hermione was quiet for a while beside him near his sleeve, the way she had been since a train when they were children. Then she said the thing she had been saying in one form or another for 5 years, the thing that was the whole of why he kept her, the only argument that had ever reached the places healing couldn't. Then we make the list worth carrying, she said. That's the only answer there is, Harry. You can't make the list shorter, you're right, you'll outlive all of us, and there's no fixing that, and I won't insult you by pretending there is. But you can make sure that every name on it is a name you're glad you got to carry. You can make sure that the long, unbearable thing you're condemned to is a long, unbearable thing full of people worth the unbearable part. She took his hand, and this time she was the one reaching, but he turned his and held hers back, the boy who could not die holding on to the girl who would not be buried before her time. I can't give you fewer goodbyes, nobody can, but I can make sure the time before the goodbye is the kind of time that makes 100 more lifetimes worth standing up for. That's what I've got, it's what I've always had. It's what I decided to give you on a train when I was 11 and didn't know yet what you were. And it still stands, it'll stand as long as I do. And Harry Potter, who had been Logan, who had been James Howlett, who had been a thing in a white room and a soldier in 100 trenches, and the last one standing at more graves than any heart was built to hold, looked at the cleverest, bravest, most stubborn person he had met in any of his lives, the one who had seen the very bottom of him and leaned in, and he felt the iron in his chest do the thing it only ever did for her, and this time he did not hold it, did not file it. did not set it down, he let it stay. All right, he said, then let's make it worth carrying. The sun went down over Hogwarts, over the new graves and the old stones and the castle that had stood 1,000 years and would stand 1,000 more, and the war was over, and the Dark Lord was gone, and the Ministry was governing itself a little more humbly than before, and a boy who could not be killed stood on the grounds where he had first arrived as a frightened child and discovered, with something like surprise, that the thing he felt was not the old cold readiness, and not the berserker's hunger. And not even grief, though the grief was there and always would be. It was peace. The small, hard-won, temporary peace of a man who has, for once, nothing left to fight and one person beside him worth being still for, and a long, unbearable, beautiful list still to be written name by name, across however many lifetimes the body insisted on standing him up to live. He had been unkillable his whole life across every life. The wizarding world had thrown its curses and its cages and its warrants and its whole frightened arsenal at the thing it could not put down. And the thing it could not put down had stood through all of it and walked out the other side, not as the monster they'd feared and not as the weapon they'd wanted, but as the one thing none of them had ever thought to plan for. A man who could not die, who had decided freely, fully, on his own terms, exactly what he was going to live for. He took Hermione's hand, and the two of them walked back up toward the lit castle through the long gold light, and behind them the graves stood quiet in the dusk, and the war passed into history, and the boy who could not die went on into the first evening of the rest of a life that would not end, unbroken, unbowed, immortal, and for the first time in 100 lifetimes not alone. Chapter 7 End.